"Marry me by sunset," the stranger said, "and you'll have a roof over your head before dark." Amelia Carter had not eaten in 2 days. She had no money, no job, and no one in this frontier town who even knew her name. The man on horseback looking down at her was not handsome in any polished way. He was weathered quiet and spoke like every word cost him something. But his eyes did not hold pity. They held a proposition. And Amelia, with nothing left to lose, looked up at him and made the most terrifying decision of her life. If this story moves you, subscribe to our channel and follow along until the very end, and drop a comment telling us what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. The day Amelia Carter arrived in Willow Creek, Montana, she had exactly 11 cents in her coat pocket, a suitcase held shut by a strip of leather she'd torn from a broken boot, and a letter that turned out to be worthless. The letter had come from a woman named Mrs. Doris Hartley, who ran a boarding house on the east side of town and had promised in 2 neat paragraphs written in schoolmarm cursive that there was a room available and a position helping with laundry and cooking in exchange for modest wages. Amelia had read that letter so many times the paper had gone soft at the folds. She had read it on the train. She had read it the night before alone in a station waiting room, pressing it against her chest like it was a deed to something real. When she finally stood in front of the boarding house on Willow Creek's main road, a woman she did not recognize opened the door halfway and looked her up and down with the expression of someone who had already made a decision before the conversation started. "You're the girl from the letter," the woman said, not a question. "I am. Amelia Carter. Mrs. Hartley wrote to me in..." "Mrs. Hartley passed 6 weeks ago." The woman gripped the door edge. "Her daughter runs the place now. We don't need help. We don't have room." Amelia stood very still. "I'm sorry about Mrs. Hartley, but I've come a very long way and I don't have..." "I'm sorry too." The door closed. She stood on the front step for a long moment looking at the wood grain of that closed door. Then she picked up her suitcase and walked back to the road. That was how the day began. She tried the general store. The owner, a barrel-chested man named Pruitt, with a sun-cracked face and suspicious eyes, told her he had no positions and didn't hire women for anything beyond the counter anyway. And he already had his wife for that. She tried the hotel on the corner where a thin man in a good vest told her the only work available was for the night shift, and when he said it, his eyes moved in a way that made her step backward without thinking. She tried the schoolhouse, though she knew it was early September and the term had started. The school teacher, a nervous young man who looked barely older than 20, told her the district had no funding for an assistant and suggested she try the church. The church was locked. By 2 in the afternoon, Amelia had walked the length of Willow Creek twice. Her feet hurt. Her mouth was dry. The 11 cents in her pocket would buy her almost nothing in 1885, and she already knew it. She sat down on a barrel outside the feed store and tried to think. There was a stage that went east again in 3 days. She had no money for the fare. There was no family to wire for help. Her father was dead. Her only uncle had made it clear when the debts came due that he considered his obligation to her finished. There was a woman at church back in Ohio who had been kind to her, but kind didn't mean capable of sending money fast enough to matter. Amelia was not the sort of woman who cried easily. She had not cried when her father died. She had not cried when the lawyer read the list of debts. She had stood in the kitchen of the house they were losing and told herself she would find a way because there was no other option. She did not cry now either. But she felt the particular weight of a person standing at the exact edge of what they can bear looking down. "You've been sitting on that barrel for better than an hour." She looked up. The man was sitting on a dark horse a few feet away, and she had not heard him come up, which startled her more than the words. He was somewhere in his early 30s, lean and brown, from weather, with a jaw that hadn't met a razor in a few days, and eyes the color of creek water over stone gray, with something green underneath hard to name. He wore working clothes not fancy, and a hat that had seen serious use. He was looking at her with an expression that was not pity and not curiosity exactly. It was something more careful than either. "I know," she said. I'm leaving. Where to? She didn't have an answer for that, and something about the directness of his question made the lack of answer feel heavier than it had before. She looked back at the road. My name is Nathan Walker, he said. I have a ranch about 9 miles north, up in the foothills. Good for you, she said, and then immediately felt ashamed of her own sharpness. I'm sorry, that was rude. You're tired, and you're in trouble, he said. You don't have to apologize for that. She looked at him again. He said it plainly without making her feel small. That alone was strange enough to hold her attention. Amelia Carter, she said. Miss Carter. He tilted his head slightly. Can I ask you something direct? You can ask. Do you have anywhere to go tonight? The 11 cents sat in her pocket like a small cold stone. I'm working on it, she said. Nathan Walker was quiet for a moment. He looked up the road, then back at her. When he spoke again, his voice was the same, even careful, like a man who chose his words the way he'd choose which rock to step on crossing a river. My wife passed 14 months ago, he said. I have a ranch that's got more work than I can manage by myself. I need someone who can handle the books, manage the house accounts, keep track of what's coming in and going out. It's real work, not simple. Amelia waited. I'm not looking for charity to offer you, he continued. And I'm not looking for a hired hand that'll leave in the spring. The arrangement I need is something more permanent. He paused. I'm talking about marriage, Miss Carter. A real one with a real home attached. You'd have a roof, food, and a wage of your own for the work you do. In return, I'd have someone I can trust with the running of things. The main road of Willow Creek was not a busy place at 3 p.m, but there were people within earshot. A woman near the dry goods store had stopped pretending to examine a bolt of fabric. 2 men outside the barber shop had gone quiet. Amelia kept her eyes on Nathan Walker. You don't know me, she said. No, but I've watched you for an hour and you haven't begged anyone. You haven't wept, and when Pruitt turned you away from the store, I was across the street. You thanked him anyway. He held her gaze. That tells me enough. That tells you I have manners. It doesn't tell you whether I'm honest. No, he said. It doesn't. But you could be lying to me about that, and I'd be no worse off than I am now. A beat. Can you say the same? Amelia looked down at her suitcase. The leather strap she'd used to hold it shut. The scuffed corner where it had hit the station floor in Denver. She thought about the boarding house door closing, about the hotel man's eyes, about the church being locked. She thought about her father, who had trusted a dishonest partner because he believed most people given the chance would do the right thing. Her father had been wrong about that, but she had never been entirely sure he was wrong about the believing part. I can keep accounts, she said. I was trained by my father. He ran a print business in Ohio. I handled his ledgers from the time I was 15. Good. I can manage a household. I'm not afraid of hard work. Good. But I have to tell you something first. She met his eyes. There are rumors following me out of Columbus. I don't know how far they've spread. People said things about me after my father died, about why the business failed, about things that weren't true. I want you to know that before you make this offer solid. Nathan Walker looked at her for a long moment. Rumors travel fast on the frontier, he said, but they're usually wrong. I've had a few of my own. He reached down and extended his hand. We can talk about the details on the ride out, but you need to decide before the sun's behind those mountains, because after dark the road gets harder. Amelia stood up. She picked up her suitcase. She knew this was not a romantic story. There was no poetry in it. A man she didn't know was offering her a contract dressed up as a marriage, and she was about to accept it because her alternative was an empty road in a town that had already closed every door. But she looked at his hand, rough, steady, not grabbing, just offered, and she thought he didn't have to stop. He could have ridden past like everyone else had. He saw the same woman Pruitt saw, and the hotel man saw, and the woman with the fabric saw. And he stopped. She took his hand. He pulled her up to ride behind him on the horse, with an ease that suggested he'd expected her to say yes, or perhaps had simply not let himself think about no. Neither of them spoke for a moment. Then from the sidewalk, a woman's voice called out sharp and carrying, "Nathan Walker, have you lost your mind entirely?" The woman's name was Frances Calhoun. She was somewhere near 50, wore her gray hair pulled back so tight it seemed to lift her eyebrows, and she had the voice of a person accustomed to being listened to. She was not a bad woman, Amelia would come to understand. She simply believed that the role of a community was to prevent its members from doing foolish things, and she had appointed herself to that task. "That woman arrived this morning with nothing and nobody," Frances said, coming down off the sidewalk to stand near the horse. "She spoke to Nathan the way you speak to someone who has not yet done something unforgivable, but is close. You don't know the first thing about her." "I know enough," Nathan said. "Nathan, you are a man with land and a reputation, and you are about to tie yourself to a stranger who—" "Frances." His voice didn't rise. It didn't have to. There was something in the steadiness of it that had the same effect as a raised voice would have for another man. "I've thought about it." Frances Calhoun looked at Amelia, then directly and without pretense. "What's your name, girl?" "Amelia Carter, ma'am." "Where are you from?" "Columbus, Ohio." "Family?" "None living." Frances's jaw shifted. "And you're willing to marry a man you met an hour ago?" "I am. Because you have no choice." Amelia held the woman's gaze. "Because he offered me one," she said. "That's more than anyone else here did." Frances looked at her for another long moment. Then she looked back at Nathan, and something passed between them that Amelia couldn't read yet. Some older, longer conversation conducted without words. "You'll come through town," Frances said finally to Nathan. "You'll do it proper. Reverend Marsh is at the church Tuesday mornings. You'll go Tuesday." "It's Sunday," Nathan said. "Then you've got 2 days to change your mind." She stepped back. "The girl can stay at my house tonight if she needs to." "She'll stay at the ranch," Nathan said. Frances made a sound that was not quite a word. "There's a Mrs. Aldrich next door who can chaperone," he added in the tone of a man who had anticipated this argument. "I already spoke to her this morning." Frances Calhoun stopped entirely. "This morning," she repeated. Nathan did not elaborate. Frances looked at Amelia with a new expression. Less certainty in it, more thought. "Tuesday," she said again, and walked back to the sidewalk. The ride out to Nathan Walker's ranch took nearly an hour, and they spent most of it in silence. That was not uncomfortable exactly, but was full of all the things two people who have just made a permanent decision haven't said yet. The land they moved through opened up as they left town. The mountains growing larger and more specific against the sky, the pines thickening on the hillsides. Amelia had not seen country like this before. Ohio was flat and green in a soft way. This was something else. This had edges. "You spoke to Mrs. Aldrich this morning," she said finally. "Yes." "Before you found me." "Found." A pause. "I came to town looking for someone to hire. I'd asked around for a few weeks. Nobody suitable." He kept his eyes ahead. "I didn't expect to find someone sitting on a barrel outside Pruitt's." "But you were already thinking about it." "Yes." "About marriage specifically." Another pause. "My ranch isn't set up for a hired woman alone," he said. "It would create talk that would make the situation worse for both of us. Marriage made more practical sense." Amelia considered this. "You're a very practical man." "I've had to be." "Were you practical with your first wife?" The question came out before she had fully formed it, and she felt him stiffen slightly. Not much, but enough for her to feel it since she was riding behind him. "Margaret wasn't a practical decision," he said after a moment. "She was someone I loved." "I'm sorry," Amelia said. "I shouldn't have asked that." "You can ask things," he said. "I'd rather you ask than assume. All right?" She looked at the mountains. "How did she die?" "Fever, the winter before last. It came on fast." a beat. She was 29. Amelia did not say anything for a moment. There was nothing sufficient to say. "I'm not asking you to be what she was," Nathan said. "I want to be clear about that. This is a different kind of arrangement." "I understand. But I'll treat you with respect. That's not something I'll negotiate on." "I don't expect you to. And if it doesn't work—" He stopped, started again. "If after a year you find it's not livable, we'll figure out a fair way to handle it. I won't hold you to something that makes you miserable." Amelia thought about that. A man she'd known for 2 hours was already planning for her potential exit with more consideration than most men she'd known for years had given her situation. "Why did you stop?" she said. "What? In town. You stopped for me. You didn't have to." He was quiet for a long moment. Long enough that she thought he wasn't going to answer. "My mother came west with nothing," he said finally. "Arrived at the wrong place with a letter that turned out worthless and nobody who would help her. Somebody helped her anyway." A pause. "That's how I came to exist." The horse walked on. The mountains grew closer. Amelia held her suitcase across her lap and felt something loosen in her chest that had been pulled tight for a very long time. Not happiness, not yet, but the first small loosening that comes before it. The ranch was not what she'd expected, though she couldn't have said exactly what she had expected. It was smaller than she'd imagined from a man who spoke about land the way Nathan had. The main house was solid, well built from the outside, the kind of structure made to last rather than to impress. There was a barn, a smaller outbuilding, a fenced area for horses, a kitchen garden that had gone partly untended. Inside the house was clean but sparse. A man living alone did not accumulate things, or at least Nathan hadn't. There was a main room with a fireplace, a kitchen, 2 bedrooms. The furniture was heavy and practical. There were very few decorations. But on the mantel above the fireplace, there were 3 small things: a woman's thimble, a photograph in a tin frame, and a river rock with some kind of marking scratched into it. Amelia looked at the photograph and then looked away. Mrs. Aldrich arrived within 20 minutes, a small, brisk woman of about 60, who seemed to find the entire situation more interesting than scandalous, which Amelia appreciated. She brought a covered dish and established herself in the main room with the efficiency of a woman who had chaperoned before and considered it a reasonable service to provide. Nathan showed Amelia the second bedroom. It had a bed, a washstand, and a window that looked toward the mountain. "It was the guest room," he said. "Margaret kept it ready." "It's fine," Amelia said. "It's very fine." He nodded, looked at the room for a moment himself. "There are books on the shelf in the main room if you want something for tonight. I'll be up early." "I'll be up early too." He looked at her, then a longer look than before, as if he was recalibrating something. Then he nodded again and left her alone. She found the ledger books after dinner. She hadn't gone looking exactly, but she'd asked Nathan if there was somewhere she could start understanding the operation, and he'd pointed to a trunk beside the desk in the corner of the main room and said the records were in there. He hadn't exaggerated about the state of them. There were 4 years of ledgers, all in Nathan's handwriting, which was not bad but inconsistent. The numbers crowding each other at the ends of rows, entries skipped and then doubled back to. There were receipts folded into the pages. There were pages that simply stopped mid-month. There was evidence of a woman's hand in the earlier books, smaller, more precise, and then a clear line where that hand disappeared and Nathan's alone continued shakier than before. Amelia sat at the desk for 2 hours, not organizing yet, just reading, getting the shape of things. The ranch was in a more precarious position than Nathan had indicated. Not ruined, the cattle were bringing in reasonable money, and the land itself was worth something. But the expenses were poorly tracked, and there were several payments that didn't make sense to her. Large round numbers going to a company she didn't recognize. Twice a year, regular as seasons, more than the ranch could easily afford. She was still looking at those entries when she heard the front door. Nathan came in from outside, stamping mud from his boots, and stopped when he saw her at the desk. "You found them," he said. "You weren't wrong about the state of the records." "No." He came to stand beside the desk, looking at the open ledger without visible embarrassment. "I'm better with a horse than a ledger book." "These payments," she said, pointing, "to the Meridian Land Company, every January and every August." "What is that?" Something changed in Nathan's face. Not much, but something, like a door closing inside. "That's something I'll explain," he said. "Not tonight." Amelia looked at him. "Is the ranch in debt to them?" "Not exactly." "Nathan." She said his name carefully since it was the first time she had. "If I'm going to help you manage this properly, I need to understand what I'm looking at." He held her gaze for a moment. Then he reached down and turned the ledger to look at the entry himself, though she suspected he didn't need to look at it. "The Meridian Land Company is operated by a man named Richard Blackwell," he said. "He has been trying to purchase this property for 3 years. What you see there is not a debt. It's a record of offers I've refused." "You wrote the offers in your own ledger." "I wrote them there so I wouldn't forget what he was willing to pay." A beat. "And so I wouldn't forget to ask myself why." Amelia looked at the numbers again. They were large, larger than she'd first registered. "This land is worth a great deal more than it looks," she said slowly. Nathan did not answer immediately. "Get some sleep, Miss Carter," he said finally. "There will be time for all of it." But as she set the ledger back and rose from the chair, she looked at his face once more. And she saw something she hadn't seen there before. Not the practical, weathered steadiness of the afternoon. Not the grief of a man who missed his wife. Something that looked, if she was reading it correctly, like fear. Tuesday came with a sky like hammered tin and a wind that meant business. Amelia wore the best dress she had, which was clean and presentable, though hardly bridal, and Nathan wore a jacket she hadn't seen before that fit him well and made him look more formal than he was comfortable with, judging by the way he kept moving his shoulders. Reverend Marsh was a thin man with kind eyes and the practical manner of a frontier minister who had performed ceremonies under every possible set of circumstances and considered the circumstances secondary to the commitment. Frances Calhoun attended. So did Mrs. Aldrich. 2 ranch hands of Nathan's who had appeared that morning, a young man named Charlie Betts with a face full of freckles, and a quiet older man called Holt stood to one side. There were also 5 or 6 townspeople who had come for reasons that had nothing to do with goodwill. Amelia knew the type. She had grown up around enough of her father's business dealings to recognize people who attended events not to celebrate, but to collect information. She could see it in the way they stood slightly apart, the way their attention was sharper than the occasion required. She kept her eyes on Reverend Marsh. The ceremony was short and plain. The Reverend asked the questions. Nathan answered them in a voice that was even and sure. When it came to her turn, Amelia answered them in the same way, not performing conviction she didn't have, but not performing doubt either. She was here. She had made a choice. She would honor it until something told her she shouldn't. When the Reverend said Nathan could kiss his bride, Nathan looked at her with a brief question in his eyes, and she gave a small nod. He pressed his lips to her cheek, formal and quick, and she felt his jaw tense slightly with the effort of it. Not distaste, but the self-consciousness of a private man in a public moment. Afterward, Frances Calhoun gripped Amelia's hand in both of hers and said very quietly, "He is a better man than this town deserves. Don't let them make you doubt that." Amelia thought about that the whole ride home. The first week was made of work. Not just hard work, but complex work, the kind that required Amelia to simultaneously learn the physical geography of the ranch, the personalities of its few employees, the habits of its owner, and the state of its finances. She rose before the sun, which she was accustomed to. She went to bed after Nathan, which she was not, but she adapted. Charlie Betts. The young ranch hand had energy and goodwill, but not a great deal of precision. Holt, the older man, had the opposite. He was meticulous and reliable, but didn't talk much, and watched her with the particular wariness of someone who had seen arrangements like this go badly before. She didn't try to win him over. She just worked steadily and waited for him to decide for himself. On the third day, she reorganized the supply ledger and found that they had been ordering 20% more feed than the horses needed because nobody had updated the count since Nathan had sold 2 horses the previous year. She brought this to Nathan quietly over dinner. He put down his fork and looked at the paper she'd laid on the table. "That's a waste we didn't need," he said. "It's fixable going forward," she said. "I'll adjust the order." He nodded, went back to his food. Then, after a moment, "Thank you." "It's what I'm here for." "Still," he said. "Thank you." She learned that he took his coffee black and slightly cooled, that he always checked the horses before bed, that he read when he couldn't sleep. History mostly, and one battered volume of poetry he kept on his bedside table and never mentioned. She learned that he was generous with his ranch hands in ways that weren't required of him. He adjusted Charlie's hours when the boy's mother was ill without docking his wages, and when a neighbor's fence blew down in a windstorm. Nathan spent an entire Saturday helping repair it without being asked. She also learned that once a week on Wednesdays, a man named Greer came to the ranch. Greer was not a ranch hand. He wore better clothes than that, and he carried himself with the weight of someone who worked for money rather than land. He and Nathan always spoke privately in the barn, and Nathan always came out of those meetings with his jaw set and his eyes somewhere far off. On the 4th Wednesday, Amelia was in the kitchen garden when Greer arrived. She watched Nathan walk out to meet him. Watched the way Nathan's whole posture changed. Not defeated, but braced. The way you brace for something you've been bracing for a long time. When Nathan came back inside, she didn't ask. But that evening, as they sat across from each other at the dinner table in the quiet that had become their version of comfortable, Nathan said suddenly, "Greer works for Blackwell." Amelia set down her fork. "He comes every week to make another offer," Nathan said. "Has for 2 years. And you keep refusing." "Yes." She waited. "He came today with a new one," Nathan said, "substantially larger." He looked at his plate. "Blackwell apparently believes I'll eventually reach a point where I can't say no." "Is he right?" Nathan looked up. "No." "Why not?" "If the money is—" "Because this land belonged to my parents," he said, "and before them to the people who worked it with them, and Blackwell is not the kind of man who buys things to build them. He buys things to extract from them and leave." A pause. "I've seen what he leaves behind." Amelia looked at him across the table. This quiet man who rode to town looking for someone to hire and came back with a wife instead. This man who paid for his neighbor's medicine and let his young ranch hand care for his sick mother and turned down more money than she would see in a lifetime because of what the land meant. "He'll escalate," she said quietly. "Yes." "If the offers don't work, he'll try something else." Nathan looked at her with the expression of a man confirming what he already knew. "Yes." "Then we need to make sure the books are in order," Amelia said. "Every record, every payment, every agreement, every boundary marker. If he tries to come at this legally or through a claim, we need everything documented so that there is no argument." Something shifted in Nathan's face. A different kind of look, not the fear she'd glimpsed that first night, but something that sat next to it and pushed it gently back. "You understand what you're getting into," he said, "if Blackwell decides we're standing in his way." "I understand. It could get difficult." "Nathan." She met his eyes. "I arrived in this town with 11 cents and a letter that was worthless. Everything since has already been better than that." He was quiet for a long moment. Then something happened that she hadn't seen before. Something small. Almost nothing, but she caught it. The edge of his mouth moved. Not quite a smile, but the shape of one beginning. "All right," he said. "Then we start tomorrow." Outside, the Montana wind moved through the pines, and the mountains held their ground the way they always had. And the night came down the way it always did. Slowly, at first, then all at once. And in the small house at the edge of the foothills, 2 practical strangers sat across from each other at a dinner table and started, without quite saying so, to become something else entirely. It was 3 weeks into their marriage when Amelia found the second set of documents. She had been working through the trunk systematically creating a proper filing system for Nathan's records when she found a sealed envelope tucked into the back of the oldest ledger. It was not hidden exactly. It was just placed in a way that suggested no one had expected to need it again. The envelope contained a survey document, old professionally drawn with measurements and boundary markers for the Walker Ranch property. Amelia spread it on the desk and looked at it carefully. Then she looked at it again. Then she sat back and thought about the numbers Blackwell had offered. The survey showed something Nathan had either not looked at closely or not told her. The northwest corner of the Walker property, the part that looked from the house like a rocky hillside going nowhere in particular, sat directly above what the survey notation described as a substantial mineral deposit. The notation was old. It might mean nothing. But if it meant something, it explained everything. It explained why Blackwell wanted this land. It explained why he kept coming back. It explained why the offers kept getting larger. And it explained with a cold clarity that settled in Amelia's chest like river water. Why a man like Richard Blackwell, a man who left things destroyed behind him, would not stop at offers if the offers stopped working. She held the paper for a long time. Then she folded it carefully and placed it back in the envelope, and put the envelope in a different place than she'd found it, one that only she would know. Then she went to find Nathan. He was in the barn working on a harness with the focused quiet of a man who used physical work to clear his head. He looked up when she came in. "There's something you need to tell me," she said. He held her gaze. "About what's in the northwest corner of your property," she said, "and why you really need someone you can trust." The barn was quiet. Outside, a horse shifted in its stall. The wind moved through the gaps in the boards. Nathan Walker put down the harness, and for the first time since she had taken his hand on the road in Willow Creek, his expression did not have any of that careful steadiness in it. What was there instead was something rawer, more human, and more afraid. "Sit down," he said quietly. "This is going to take a while." Nathan didn't sit down right away. He stood in the middle of the barn with his hands at his sides and looked at Amelia the way a man looks at something he's been dreading for a long time, not with surprise, but with the particular exhaustion of someone who has been waiting for a reckoning and is almost relieved it's finally arrived. "How much did you see?" he said. "Enough." Amelia kept her voice level. "The survey. The mineral notation in the northwest corner. The dates." She paused. "The size of Blackwell's offers suddenly makes a great deal of sense." Nathan turned away from her and leaned against the barn wall with one hand his back half to her. A long silence stretched between them. Not comfortable this time. "How long have you known," she asked, "about the deposit?" He let out a slow breath. "My father found the first signs of it when I was 12. He had a proper survey done when I was 15. Didn't tell anyone outside the family." A pause. "He said the land wasn't worth dying over, but men would die for what was under it if they knew, so he kept it quiet. And after he died, I kept it quiet too." Amelia looked at the back of his shoulders. "And when Blackwell started making offers, I knew he'd found out somehow. Not the full survey, I don't think he has that. But rumors travel, and Blackwell has people who listen for rumors." Nathan turned back to face her then, and his face was doing the thing she'd noticed before, the thing where he controlled it so carefully that the control itself told you something was happening underneath. "I didn't tell you because I didn't know you, because the fewer people who know, the safer the land is. And now you found it yourself." Something moved in his eyes, not quite humor, not quite resignation. "You're thorough. You hired me to be thorough." "I did." He looked at her steadily. "Are you angry?" Amelia considered the question seriously the way it deserved. She had a right to be angry. She had married this man, entered an agreement with him in good faith, and he had withheld something that changed the entire shape of their situation. That was not a small thing, but she had also kept her father's books for 11 years. She knew what information did to people. She knew what it felt like to watch a man share something valuable with someone who hadn't earned it yet, and to watch what happened next, Not angry, she said finally. But I need you to understand something. If Blackwell escalates, and he will, and I'm going to stand between you and whatever he does, I cannot do that blind. Not again. Not with partial information. She held his gaze. I need to know everything. The full survey. Whatever conversations you've had with Blackwell's people. Whatever legal ground you're standing on and wherever it's shaky. All of it. Nathan studied her face for a long moment. Everything, he said. Everything. He pushed off the wall and reached up to a high shelf, one she wouldn't have known to look at, and brought down a flat wooden box she'd never seen before. He set it on the workbench between them. Then let's start here, he said. The box contained more than the survey. There were letters, a dozen of them, from Blackwell's company, each one more formal and more pointed than the last. There were notes from a lawyer in Helena that Nathan had consulted 2 years ago about the legality of Blackwell's approaches. There was a copy of the original land patent his father had filed, and beside it a second document that Amelia had to read twice before she understood what she was looking at. Nathan, she said. Yes, this boundary description. She pointed to a paragraph in the land patent. It uses a creek marker. Mitchell Creek. Yes? Mitchell Creek changed course. I noticed it on the survey. The current creek line doesn't match the one on this document. Nathan went very still. If Blackwell's lawyers find that discrepancy, she said, they could argue the boundary is unclear. They could use it to challenge the patent. I know, Nathan said quietly. You know. She looked up at him. You knew and you didn't have it corrected. I didn't know how serious it was. I thought... He stopped, looked at the document. I thought it was a technicality, something too minor to matter. It's not minor. Amelia set the document flat on the workbench and looked at it hard. A good lawyer could make a very solid argument with this, especially if Blackwell has influence with the Territorial Land Commission, which I assume he does. He does, Nathan said. He has Judge Harlan in his pocket. Everyone in this territory knows it, but nobody says it out loud because Harlan has the authority to make life very difficult for people who talk. Amelia absorbed this. She thought of her father, a good man, a careful man who had lost everything because he trusted that the rules were the same for everyone, and didn't understand until too late that the rules bent for men with money and straightened back up for men without it. When does Greer come next? She asked. Wednesday, 6 days. Good. She gathered the documents carefully and set them in a stack. I'm going to need those 6 days. Odd. She did not sleep much in those 6 days. She worked at the desk in the main room while Nathan slept, spreading the documents under the lamplight and reading them the way her father had taught her to read a contract, not for what it said, but for what it didn't say. For the gaps. For the places where a careful person had left room, and whether that room had been left by accident or on purpose. On the third night, Nathan came out of his room at some point past midnight and found her still at the desk. He didn't say anything at first. He went to the kitchen and came back with 2 cups of coffee and set one beside her without being asked. She looked up. You don't have to do this at night, he said. I think better when it's quiet. Then I'll be quiet. He sat down in the chair by the fireplace with his own cup and opened his book, the battered poetry volume, and read, or appeared to read. She noticed he turned pages less frequently than a person actually reading would. She went back to the documents. After a while she said, Did Blackwell ever approach Margaret before she died? Nathan was still for a moment. Once, early on when the offer started. What did she say to him? She told him the land wasn't for sale and offered him coffee, which confused him considerably. A pause. She was better at that than I am, staying pleasant while meaning no. Amelia almost smiled. She sounds like she was something. She was. His voice was even, carrying the kind of grief that has had time to settle into something you can carry. She would have liked you, I think. She had no patience for people who couldn't see past the surface of a thing, and you're the same way. The compliment was simple and unperformed, and it landed differently than compliments usually did. Amelia turned back to the document in front of her and said nothing, because there wasn't anything to say that wouldn't have been less than the moment. They sat in the lamplight, each in their own work, in the particular silence of two people who have stopped being strangers without quite noticing when it happened. On the fifth day, Charlie Betts came in from mending the north fence line with news that sat in his face like something too big for it. "There were men out by the northwest corner," he said. "Two of them. Didn't recognize either of them. They had equipment, surveying equipment, I think. When they saw me coming, they packed it up fast and rode off." Nathan's jaw went tight. "Did they speak to you?" Amelia asked. "One of them said they were just passing through, but they weren't passing through anywhere. There's no road out there, no reason to be in that corner unless you're looking at it." Nathan looked at Amelia. Amelia looked back at him. "He's already commissioned his own survey," she said. "Looks that way. Which means he's moving faster than his offers suggested." She stood up from the table. "Nathan, we cannot wait for Greer to come on Wednesday. We need to get to Helena before Blackwell's lawyers do." "Amelia, if he files a boundary challenge based on Mitchell Creek before we get there with a corrected patent application, we lose the initiative. We could spend years in litigation." She was already moving toward the trunk, pulling out the documents she'd organized. "How fast can you get to Helena?" "Hard riding 2 days." "Then you need to leave tomorrow morning." Nathan stood up from the table slowly. "I can't leave the ranch unattended. Holt can manage for a few days. He knows this place better than anyone." She didn't stop moving. "I'll write out exactly what you need to present to the land office and what you need to say. And I'll write a separate letter for the lawyer you used before we need him to file a formal boundary correction affidavit immediately." "You've been to a territorial land office before?" "No, but I've read contracts and patents for 11 years, and I know what they need and what they don't." She looked up at him. "Nathan, you have to trust me on this." He looked at her. This woman he'd brought home 3 weeks ago, who had arrived with 11 cents and a ruined letter, and had in the space of 3 weeks reorganized his financial records, identified a critical legal vulnerability in his property claim, and was now standing in his kitchen at 5 in the afternoon, telling him with complete certainty what needed to happen. "I trust you," he said. Something happened in Amelia's chest at those 2 words. Something she hadn't been expecting. A warmth that had nothing to do with practical arrangements. She turned back to the documents before he could see her face. "Good," she said. "Then sit down and let me explain exactly what you're going to say." Nathan left before sunrise the next morning. Amelia stood in the yard and watched him go, his silhouette sharp against the pre-dawn sky. And she thought, this is the person I am now. The person who stays and holds the ground while someone else rides. She could live with that. She had barely turned back to the house when Greer arrived. Not on Wednesday, on Tuesday, a day early. He wasn't alone. He came with 2 other men she didn't know. Both of them bigger than Greer and quieter, and they rode up to the front of the house with the ease of people who had decided in advance that they owned the space they were entering. Greer himself was a compact man with a smile that never quite reached his eyes, and he looked at Amelia standing alone in the yard with an expression that recalculated something. "Mrs. Walker," he said, his tone suggesting the title was something he found mildly amusing. "I was expecting Nathan." "Nathan isn't here," she said. "I can see that." He looked at the house, back at her. "We'll wait." "You won't," Amelia said. Greer's smile stayed in place. "Pardon. You'll state your business with me or you'll leave. Those are the options." She folded her hands in front of her in a way that she hoped looked calmer than she felt. Her heart was going quickly, but her face knew how to lie about that. "I am Nathan Walker's wife, and I manage the affairs of this property. If you have something to say to this household, say it." Greer looked at her for a moment with something that was not quite amusement anymore. The 2 men behind him had the stillness of people waiting for a signal. "Mr. Blackwell," Greer said carefully, "has extended a new offer, the most generous one yet. He's hoping Nathan will consider it seriously this time." "The answer is the same as it always is," Amelia said. You don't know the amount. The amount doesn't matter. The answer is no. Mrs. Walker. Greer's voice dropped slightly, became more confidential, as if the men behind him had ceased to exist. I want to be plain with you because I think you're a practical woman. The boundary question on this property, the one regarding the creek, is not going to go away. Mr. Blackwell's lawyers are very thorough. It would be better for everyone if this were resolved through an agreement rather than through the courts. Amelia held his gaze. Is that a threat? She said. It's an observation. I'll give you an observation in return. She stepped forward one deliberate step. Whatever Mr. Blackwell's lawyers are planning, they are already too late. The corrected patent application is on its way to Helena as we speak, along with a formal affidavit from an attorney of record. This was not quite true yet. Nathan was on his way, not there, but Greer didn't know that, and the truth of the intention was the same. The boundary question is being resolved through proper legal channels. If Mr. Blackwell's people file any challenge now, they will be challenging a correction already in process, which will not reflect well on the nature of their claim. Greer stared at her. The smile was entirely gone. You've been busy, he said, and his voice had a different quality in it now. Something that Amelia recognized as a man rethinking a situation he'd thought was already won. This is my home, she said. I take that seriously. A long pause. Mr. Blackwell will want to speak with Nathan directly, Greer said. Mr. Blackwell is welcome to send a letter like a civilized person. She met his eyes without blinking. Good day, Mr. Greer. He looked at her for one more long moment. Then he turned his horse around, and the two men with him turned theirs, and they rode back down the road. Amelia stood very still until they were out of sight. Then she went inside, sat down at the desk, and let her hands shake for exactly 30 seconds before she picked up the pen and started writing everything down while the details were still sharp. Charlie Betts appeared in the doorway an hour later. Were those Blackwell's men? He asked. Yes. He was quiet for a moment. You ran them off. I asked them to leave. Charlie looked at the road, then back at Amelia. He had the expression of someone updating a file in his mind, specifically the file labeled Amelia Walker, which had apparently contained one set of information until about an hour ago, and now contained a different set. Holt wants to know if he should ride after Nathan and warn him, Charlie said. No, Nathan has what he needs and he'll be in Helena by tomorrow night. She set down the pen. But tell Holt to keep an eye on the northwest corner. If those surveyors come back, I want to know immediately. Charlie nodded, turned to go, then turned back. Mrs. Walker. Yes. My mother's brother works at the land office in Helena, he said carefully. Not a lawyer, just a clerk, but he knows who files what and when. If you wanted someone to keep an eye on what Blackwell's people might submit there. Amelia looked at him. What's his name? She said. Eli Betts. He's honest. He owes me a favor. Write him a letter today, Amelia said. Tell him what we're looking for. Tell him it's urgent. She held Charlie's gaze. And Charlie, thank you. The young man flushed slightly and nodded and went back outside. Amelia turned back to the desk. Added Eli Betts to her letter. Nathan came back on the 4th day, not the 2nd. She heard the horse before she saw him, and she was at the door before he'd dismounted. One look at his face told her something had happened, but she couldn't read what kind of something yet. He came inside, took off his hat, sat down at the table with the careful movement of someone who has been in a saddle for too long and is not going to complain about it. The boundary correction is filed, he said. Good. She poured coffee and set it in front of him. What else? He looked up. How did you know there was something else? You were gone 4 days instead of 2, and you're sitting like a man carrying news he doesn't know how to start with. Nathan picked up the coffee, held it, put it back down. Blackwell was in Helena, he said. Not in person, but his lawyer was. A man named Forsyth. Apparently he filed something the day before I arrived. Amelia sat down. What did he file? A claim that the Walker Ranch was purchased originally from a man named Dowd, under a fraudulent agreement. He's saying my father's original patent was obtained on the basis of a false survey. Nathan's voice was controlled, but the control had weight behind it. He's not attacking the boundary. He's attacking the patent itself. Amelia stared at him. That's a different claim entirely, she said. Yes. And your father's original purchase from Dowd is their documentation. There is, but the documentation is here. I didn't bring it to Helena because I didn't know I'd need it. He met her eyes. Forsyth timed it. He waited until I was on the road and then filed something he knew I couldn't immediately refute. Does your lawyer think the claim has merit? He thinks Blackwell has manufactured something from nothing but manufacturing, and having merit aren't the same thing in a courtroom. Nathan's jaw was tight. He says we have 60 days to respond with documentation, or the claim proceeds unchallenged. 60 days. Amelia thought about the trunk in the corner. About the 4 years of ledgers, the letters, the original documents she'd been systematically organizing for 3 weeks. She thought about her father's lesson, the one she'd carried since she was 15 years old, about how a document is only as powerful as the person who understands how to use it. The original purchase agreement from Dowd, she said. Is it in the trunk? It should be. And witnesses to the transaction signed affidavits from anyone who was present. There might be something. My father was careful. Good. She was already standing, already moving toward the trunk. Because we are going to build a case that Forsyth cannot put a scratch on, and we are going to do it in less than 60 days, and when we are done, Richard Blackwell is going to understand that this family does not lose its land. Nathan watched her pull the trunk open with both hands. Amelia. His voice was different than she'd heard it before. Quieter, less controlled. She looked up. I need to tell you something, he said. Something I should have told you before any of this. She held his gaze. Waited. My father's land, the original purchase. It wasn't just this ranch. He set down the coffee cup. When he bought from Dowd, he bought 3 parcels. I sold 2 of them after he died when I was young, and thought the money was more important than the land. He looked at the table. I've regretted it since. But those sales they went through Blackwell's predecessor company. A man named Crane. Amelia felt something cold in her chest. Blackwell bought Crane's company, she said slowly. Yes. Which means Blackwell now holds the records from those original sales. Yes. And if those records show anything at all that could be read as irregularity in your father's original dealings with Dowd, then Forsyth has material to work with, Nathan said. Yes. Amelia was very still for a moment. This was not just a boundary question anymore. This was not just a creek that had changed course. This was a man who had been constructing a case for years, collecting pieces, waiting for the right moment, and who had finally decided the moment was now. Nathan, she said carefully, did your father have any conflict with Dowd? Any disagreement, any dispute after the sale? Nathan looked at her. The silence lasted too long. Nathan, there was a letter, he said, from Dowd, 2 years after the sale. Dowd wrote that he felt he'd been underpaid. My father wrote back that the price was agreed upon and the agreement was signed. Do you have both letters? My father's copy of his own letter, not Dowd's. Where is Dowd now? Dead, 7 years ago. Did he have family? Nathan's expression shifted, and Amelia, watching him carefully, saw the answer before he said it. A son, Nathan said. Dowd's son. His name is Arthur. And where is Arthur Dowd? Nathan looked at her with the expression of a man watching dominoes fall. He works for Richard Blackwell, he said. The room was very quiet. Since when? Amelia asked. Since last year. Nathan's voice was low. I didn't put it together until right now. I knew Blackwell had hired someone named Dowd. I didn't connect it. Amelia sat back down. This was not an opportunistic land grab. This was personal. Arthur Dowd had brought his father's grievance, real or manufactured, to a man with the money and the lawyers to do something with it. And Blackwell had accepted it because it gave him exactly the legal weapon he'd needed. "The original purchase agreement," she said quietly. "Is there anything in it that Dowd could point to? Any language that could be read as coercive? Any clause that looked unusual?" "I don't know," Nathan said. "I haven't read it in years." "Then we're going to read it tonight." She reached into the trunk and started searching. Nathan leaned forward, elbows on his knees, watching her hands move through the papers. "You could leave," he said quietly. "If this becomes something, if Blackwell pushes hard enough, you could leave. You didn't sign on for a land dispute." Amelia stopped what she was doing. She turned and looked at him fully, at this man who had stopped his horse on a dusty road because his mother had once needed someone to stop for her, who had paid for his neighbor's medicine without anyone knowing, who had held his land not because it made him rich, but because it was the thing that his parents had built, and he was not willing to let a man like Blackwell take the meaning out of it. "I didn't sign on for a lot of things," she said. "Neither did you." She held his gaze. "Find me the document." Nathan reached into the far corner of the trunk and came up with an envelope that was older than everything else in there. He set it on the table between them. Amelia opened it, and the moment she read the second paragraph of the original purchase agreement between Leland Walker and James Dowd, she felt the cold certainty of someone who has found the thing that was supposed to stay hidden. "Nathan," she said, "what is it?" She read it again to make sure. "Your father didn't buy this land outright," she said. "There's a clause, a reversion clause. If the land is ever found to contain substantial mineral value, those are the exact words, Dowd retained the right to renegotiate the price, within the lifetime of either party or their direct heirs." She set the paper down. "Arthur Dowd is a direct heir," she said. "He is. And Blackwell knows this clause exists. He must. And he's been waiting until he had enough evidence of the mineral deposit to activate it." Nathan said nothing for a moment. His hands were flat on the table. His eyes were on the document. "Which means," Amelia said slowly, "this was never really about the boundary or the patent. Those are just legal noise to create confusion." She looked up. "What Blackwell actually wants is to get Arthur Dowd to invoke the reversion clause, renegotiate the price at current value, including the mineral rights, and then buy Dowd out. He'll end up with the land and the deposit without ever having to steal anything. It'll all look perfectly legal." Nathan looked at her. "Can he do that?" he said. "Only if we let him." Amelia folded the document back into the envelope. "Because there is something else in this clause." She set it down. "The reversion right expires if the mineral value is developed by the current owner. If you file a mineral claim on the northwest corner, your own claim properly registered before Blackwell can activate the reversion through Dowd, you establish current ownership of the mineral rights independently of the original agreement." The quiet in the room was a different kind of quiet now. "I'm not a mining man," Nathan said. "You don't have to be. You just have to be the person who files first." She met his eyes. "How fast can we get a mineral rights claim in front of the territorial commissioner?" Nathan looked at her for a long moment, and then he said something that surprised her completely, not because of the words, but because of the way he said them, with something in his voice she hadn't heard from him before, something that had warmth in it, and something that had weight, the weight of a man saying a true thing he doesn't say easily. "I don't know what I would have done," he said, "if I'd ridden past you on that road." Amelia looked at the table, felt the warmth spread in her chest, and stayed very still inside it for one moment before she let it pass. "You wouldn't have ridden past," she said quietly. "That's not who you are." She picked up the envelope and stood. "Now, tell me everything you know about the Territorial Mining Commission, and let's figure out how much time we have." Outside, the wind moved down from the mountains. The pines bent and straightened, and in the small lamp-lit house at the edge of the foothills, two people who had started as a practical arrangement began building something neither of them had a word for, yet something stronger than a contract, something that didn't need a word, because it was already real in the way that only things built under pressure ever truly are. The mineral claim filing had to happen fast. That much they both understood. Nathan knew a man in Billings, a former ranch hand named Prescott, who had done some prospecting work and understood how to write a proper claim description. He sent Charlie with a letter the next morning, and Charlie rode hard. While they waited for Prescott's reply, Amelia worked on the documentation package. The survey, the land patent, the purchase agreement, and a written account of the reversion clause that she composed herself in language clear enough that anyone reading it could understand exactly what they were looking at and what they were not. She worked the way she always worked when something mattered, without stopping until it was done. It was Holt who interrupted her on the second evening. He knocked on the doorframe of the main room. Holt never simply walked in, and stood there with his hat in his hands and an expression she'd come to recognize as his version of urgency, which for Holt looked like other men's version of mild concern. "Ryder came through the east pasture," he said. "Didn't stop. Just rode through. Looked at the northwest ridge and went back the way he came." Amelia set down her pen. "One of Blackwell's surveyors. Couldn't say for sure. Wasn't anyone local." She looked at Nathan. Nathan looked at Holt. "How long ago?" Nathan said. "About an hour. I came soon as the fence work was done." Nathan stood up from the table. "I'll ride out and check the corner." "I'll come with you," Amelia said. Nathan looked at her. She could see him weighing it. The practical man in him calculating whether bringing her was sensible, whether the conditions were safe, whether her presence would slow things down. She watched him work through it and reach the end. "Get your coat," he said. The northwest corner of the Walker property told a story without words. There were marks in the earth, surveying stakes, 3 of them driven in, with professional precision, in a triangle pattern that Amelia recognized from her father's days dealing with property assessors. One of the stakes had a small metal tag attached to it with a number stamped into the tin. Not Blackwell's name, not any name she recognized, but a number which meant a filing, which meant it was already in a record somewhere. Nathan pulled one of the stakes from the ground and held it. "They've been here more than once," he said. "These are set deep. This wasn't an hour's work." Amelia looked at the pattern of the stakes, at the way they were placed. She thought about what she knew about mining claim boundaries, which was not nothing. Her father had printed several mining company prospectuses over the years, and she had proofread them carefully enough to understand their structure. "They've already defined the claim boundary," she said. "They're not just surveying the mineral deposit. They've staked the claim itself." Nathan turned the stake in his hand. "Can they file a claim on land they don't own?" "They can file. Whether it holds is a different question." She looked at the 3 stakes and then at the ridge above them. "But if they file before we do, even a bad claim creates a legal contest. And a legal contest is expensive and slow is exactly what Blackwell wants. How much time do we have? If they're staking today, they're filing tomorrow or the day after. We need Prescott here now." She turned back toward the horses. "Write to him again. Tell him to come immediately. Offer him double what you said before." Nathan said nothing for a moment. Then he said, "You know I don't have double." "I know," Amelia said. "But he doesn't know that yet." Prescott arrived in 3 days, which was faster than reasonable, and suggested Charlie had ridden harder than asked. He was a small, wiry man who smelled of campfire smoke and knew more about the territory's mining regulations than anyone had a right to. And when Amelia spread her documentation on the kitchen table and walked him through it, he listened with the focused attention of someone who understood what was at stake without being told. "The reversion clause is the problem," he said when she finished. "I know. The mineral claim filing will establish current ownership of the rights, but only if it's accepted before Dowd invokes the clause." He tapped the edge of the survey with one finger. "How much time do you think you have before Blackwell moves Dowd?" "I don't know," Amelia said. "That's what worries me." "Well," Prescott leaned back. "Here's your other problem. A mineral claim this size over a deposit with a survey like this one is going to attract attention the moment it's filed. Right now, Blackwell thinks he's moving quietly. Once you file, he'll know the game has changed. The game has already changed, Nathan said from the doorway. He's had his people staking our land. He's going to push harder, Prescott said. Faster. He'll move Dowd before you can get the claim processed. Amelia looked at the survey. At the document package she'd built over the past days. At the reversion clause that sat inside all of it like a stone inside a fist. Then we don't file quietly, she said. Both men looked at her. If we file a standard claim, it goes through the territorial commissioner's office, gets logged, gets reviewed. Weeks. She looked up. But if we request an emergency validation hearing, if we present the evidence of Blackwell's illegal survey activity on our land, the staked claim on property he doesn't own, and request that the commissioner rule on our mineral rights before the contested claim can be processed, we force this into the open. A public hearing, Prescott said. A public hearing, where Blackwell cannot move Dowd quietly in the background because everything is on record. A long pause. It'll be public, Nathan said. Everything about the deposit. Everything about the value of this land. Yes. He looked at the table. That's what I've spent 15 years trying to avoid. I know. Amelia held his gaze. But the quiet didn't protect you, Nathan. He found out anyway. And quiet is what he's counting on now. She set both hands flat on the table. We take this into the light. All of it. And we make it so loud that even Judge Harlan can't manage the outcome. The kitchen was silent for a long moment. Nathan looked at Prescott. Prescott shrugged in the way of a man who has seen enough frontier legal battles to know that the only predictable thing about them is that playing it safe always loses to playing it bold. She's right, Prescott said. Nathan looked back at Amelia. Something moved in his face. Not the controlled steadiness she'd come to know. Not the settled grief, but something rawer. Something that looked like a man standing at the edge of something large and deciding to step forward instead of back. Then we go to Helena, he said. Both of us. They left at first light. Francis Calhoun appeared at the ranch gate as they were mounting, which startled Amelia considerably, since it was barely past 5 in the morning, and Francis lived 2 miles in the other direction. I heard you were going to Helena, Francis said without preamble. Word travels fast, Nathan said. Charlie Betts has a mother who talks. Francis looked at Amelia directly. What do you need? Amelia studied the older woman. 3 weeks ago, Francis Calhoun had stood on a Willow Creek sidewalk and watched this marriage happen with the expression of someone watching a carriage go off a cliff in slow motion. She had offered Amelia a night's lodging and called Nathan a better man than the town deserved, and she had not in the weeks since been anything less than watchful in the way of someone who has decided to reserve judgment until judgment is warranted. Letters, Amelia said. Character letters. From people in this town who know Nathan Walker's family history, his father's reputation, and the nature of his dealings over the years. Francis nodded once briskly. How many do you need? As many as you can get, signed and dated. I'll have them sent to the commissioner's office in Helena within 4 days. Francis, Nathan started. Don't thank me, Francis said. I'm doing it because Leland Walker was a decent man, and he deserves better than what Blackwell's people are trying to do to his name. She looked at Nathan. Your father helped my husband file his first land claim 22 years ago. He didn't ask for anything in return. It's time I returned the favor. She looked at Amelia. You take care of this. I will, Amelia said. Francis nodded again and stepped back from the gate. The road to Helena was long, and they covered it faster than comfortable camping one night along the way and arriving in the city on the afternoon of the second day. Helena was not Willow Creek. It had the energy of a place where money moved lawyers' offices, land brokers a courthouse with a new addition still under construction hotels that had drapes in the windows. Amelia had not been in a city since Columbus, and the size of it after weeks in the foothills felt strange and loud. They went first to Nathan's lawyer, a man named Gardner, who had the measured speech of someone who had learned to say everything twice, so people couldn't claim they hadn't heard it. When Amelia laid the full documentation package on his desk, the survey, the patent, the purchase agreement, the photographs of the surveying stakes on Walker Land Prescott's mineral claim application, and her own written analysis of the reversion clause, Gardner went through it slowly, page by page, without speaking. When he finished, he looked up at Amelia. "You prepared this," he said. "Yes. You have legal training. I have a father who believed in reading everything carefully and a habit of not stopping until I understood what I was looking at." Gardner looked at Nathan. "You have 6 weeks of marriage, and she's already better at this than 3 of my clerks," he said without apparent irony. Nathan almost smiled. "What's our position?" Amelia asked. Gardner sat back. "Stronger than I expected when your husband walked in here 2 weeks ago. The illegal survey stakes on Walker Land, if you can get those documented by an officer of the court, before Blackwell's people pull them, constitute a trespass on private property, which undermines any claim filed from that survey." He tapped the document. "The reversion clause is the real danger, but your analysis is correct. A mineral claim filed prior to any invocation by a Dowd heir should establish current ownership independently." He paused. "The question is timing. Can you request an emergency hearing with the commissioner?" Amelia asked. "I can. It requires demonstrating imminent harm to the claimant's property rights." He looked at the photograph of the survey stakes. "I think we can demonstrate that." "How long to get a hearing date?" "In normal circumstances, 3 to 4 weeks. Emergency petition, possibly 10 days to 2 weeks." "And how long before Blackwell can move Dowd to invoke the reversion?" Gardner was quiet for a moment. "That depends on how much Blackwell knows about what we're doing." A knock at the office door. Gardner's clerk put his head in. "I'm sorry to interrupt. There's a gentleman outside who says he needs to speak with Mr. Walker. Says his name is Dowd." The room went completely still. Amelia looked at Nathan. Nathan looked at the door. "Arthur Dowd," Nathan said. He didn't give a first name. Said it was urgent. Amelia and Nathan exchanged a look that lasted only a second, but carried the entire weight of the situation. The document package on the desk. The 58 days left in their window. Blackwell's stakes in the northwest corner, and now the man at the center of the reversion clause, standing 20 feet away. "Send him in," Amelia said. Gardner looked at her. She nodded. He nodded to the clerk. Arthur Dowd was younger than Amelia had expected, mid-30s, with his father's coloring, but something his father probably hadn't had, at least not when he'd been dealing with Leland Walker, which was the look of a man who has been carrying something uncomfortable for a long time and isn't sure he wants to put it down or pick it up higher. He looked at Nathan first, then at Amelia, then at the document spread on Gardner's desk, and something in his expression shifted. "You already know?" he said. "Sit down, Mr. Dowd," Amelia said. He sat. "How did you know we were here?" Nathan said. "Blackwell's people have been watching your ranch." Dowd set his hat on his knee. "I didn't know until yesterday that you were heading to Helena. By the time I figured it out, you'd already left." He looked at Nathan directly. "I came to tell you something before this goes any further." Nathan said nothing, waited. "My father's grievance against your father, it wasn't invented," Dowd said. "He genuinely believed he'd been underpaid. I grew up with that story." He stopped. "But when Blackwell came to me 2 years ago and explained what the land was worth and what the reversion clause might allow, I thought it was a way to correct an old wrong." He paused again, and the pause had weight in it. "I didn't understand until recently what Blackwell actually intended to do with it." "And what did you come to understand?" Amelia said. Dowd looked at her carefully with the look of a man measuring a person he hadn't expected to be measuring. "That he intended to use me to get the claim invalidated, get the reversion triggered, renegotiate the purchase price at current value to include the mineral rights, and then buy me out immediately at a fraction of what those rights were actually worth." He set both hands on his knees. "I would have ended up with maybe 10% of what the land was worth. The rest would have gone to Blackwell. And you only figured this out recently, Amelia said. Her voice was even careful, not accusing, or not only accusing. His lawyer let something slip, Dowd said flatly. Men like Forsyth get careless when they think they're winning. The room was quiet. Mr. Dowd, Amelia said, let me ask you something direct. Do you believe your father was genuinely wronged? A long pause. I believe he thought he was. And do you have documentation of that? His letter to Nathan's father? Yes. May I see it? Dowd looked at her for a moment. Then he reached inside his jacket and produced an envelope. He set it on the desk. Amelia opened it and read it carefully. The letter was what Nathan had described a grievance about the price, not an accusation of fraud. James Dowd had felt he'd sold too cheap in a moment of need. That was real. That was human. That was not the same as saying the sale was fraudulent. The reversion clause in the original agreement was real, Amelia said. But the clause requires demonstration of substantial mineral value before it can be invoked. There is no court-recognized assay of the Walker property's mineral content. Blackwell's survey is illegal because it was conducted on private property without permission. She set the letter down. Mr. Dowd, if you invoke the reversion clause, you will be invoking it on the basis of an illegal survey and an unrecognized mineral assessment. A good lawyer, and Mr. Gardner is a very good lawyer, will challenge both. She let that sit for a moment. But more importantly, she continued, you will be doing so in a public hearing that is now a matter of record, in which it will become clear that you were brought into this arrangement by Richard Blackwell for the purpose of generating a legal claim that would ultimately benefit Blackwell, not you. She met his eyes. How do you think that looks, Mr. Dowd? Arthur Dowd sat very still. What I'm offering you, Amelia said carefully, is different. If your father genuinely sold at below market value under financial pressure, that is something that can be acknowledged without court proceedings. Nathan Walker is not a man who benefits from your family's hardship. She looked at Nathan. Tell him. Nathan held Dowd's gaze. If there was an unfair gap in what your father received, I'm willing to discuss that, he said. Outside of court, without Blackwell involved. Dowd looked at Nathan for a long time. You'd do that, he said. Not a question exactly. More like a man testing the weight of something unexpected. I would, Nathan said. My father wanted to settle things fairly. If he didn't, I'd want to correct that. Another silence. Blackwell will not be happy, Dowd said. No, Amelia agreed. He won't. Dowd looked at the documents on the desk. At Nathan. At Amelia, who held his gaze without flinching. I have a meeting with Forsyth tomorrow morning, he said, at which point I'm supposed to sign the formal invocation of the reversion clause. Don't go, Amelia said simply. He looked at her. Don't go to that meeting, she said. And send Mr. Gardner a letter today confirming that you declined to invoke the reversion clause and that you are withdrawing from Blackwell's arrangement. She paused. That letter filed with the court today removes Blackwell's primary legal weapon. Dowd was quiet for a long moment. The clock on Gardner's wall was the only sound. And if he comes after me, Dowd said. He'll come after Nathan first, Amelia said. Nathan is the larger prize. She kept her voice steady. But if you're worried about protection, your letter to Gardner today creates a public record that you acted independently. That's harder for Blackwell to retaliate against than a private withdrawal. Gardner had been listening to all of this with the expression of a man watching something that should have taken weeks happen in the space of 40 minutes. Mr. Dowd, Gardner said, I can have that letter drafted in 20 minutes. Dowd sat with his hat in his hands for one more moment. Then he set the hat on the desk. Draft it, he said. They were back on the street an hour later. Amelia walked beside Nathan without speaking for half a block, and Nathan let the silence sit, which was one of the things she had come to understand about him. He knew when a person needed to walk their thoughts out before turning them into words. That was not what I expected today to be, he said finally. No, she agreed. Do you think he'll hold? I think he made a decision in there that he'll second-guess tonight, she said honestly. But I also think he's been second-guessing the other decision for a while and this one sits better. She paused. People generally do the thing they can live with. It just sometimes takes a moment to figure out which thing that is. Nathan was quiet for a moment. You were very good in there. I've watched a lot of men make bad deals, she said. I know what they look like from the outside when they're in the middle of one. A pause. My father, she said, and then stopped. Nathan waited. He made a bad deal once, she said. With his partner. He trusted someone he shouldn't have, not because he was foolish, but because he believed in giving people the benefit of the doubt. She kept her eyes ahead. I used to think that was what got him killed. Not the fever, I mean, but the weight of it. Of having trusted wrong. She took a breath. But I think now that the trusting wasn't the mistake. The mistake was not having the documentation to protect himself when the trust turned out to be misplaced. Nathan said nothing for a moment. I'm sorry about your father, he said. He was a good man. She said it simply, the way Nathan said things about Margaret. Carried grief, not raw grief. He would have liked you, I think. He had very little patience for men who made noise and very high regard for men who kept their word. They walked. Amelia, Nathan said. Yes. When this is over. He stopped, started differently. When this is settled. I want to talk about the arrangement. She felt something careful happen in her chest. What about it? I want to change it, he said. Or rather, I want to ask you if you want to change it. It started as a practical arrangement, and I said at the start that if it wasn't livable, we'd find a fair way to handle it. He paused. But I don't want to find a fair way to handle it. I want to ask you if it's something else now. For you. She kept walking. Her heart was doing something she wasn't going to acknowledge out loud. Ask me when this is settled, she said. Not before. Why not before? Because I want to make sure when I answer that I'm saying it for the right reasons, she said. And right now I'm standing in Helena after convincing a man to pull out of a land deal and emotions are running a certain way, and I'd rather answer you when I've had time to think clearly. Nathan considered this. That's fair, he said. I know, she said. They walked on, and then from across the street a voice called out that changed the temperature of everything. Nathan Walker. The voice was confident, a man who used it like a tool. I was wondering when you'd come out of hiding. Richard Blackwell was not what Amelia had imagined. She had built him in her mind from his actions, the lawyers, the surveyors in the night, the relentless pressure, and she had imagined someone colder, harder, more visibly predatory. What she saw instead was a man of 50 or so well-dressed, with a broad face, and the particular ease of someone who had almost always gotten what he wanted and had refined his manner accordingly. He was not cruel-looking. He was comfortable-looking, which was somehow worse. He had 2 men with him, neither of them Greer. He walked toward them across the street without hurrying, the way a man walks toward something he owns. Heard you've been visiting Gardner, Blackwell said, stopping a few feet away. He looked at Amelia with a gaze that assessed rather than greeted. And this must be the wife. I'd heard Nathan had married. Didn't believe it at first. Mr. Blackwell, Amelia said. Mrs. Walker. He said it with the same mild amusement Greer had used, as if the title was somehow provisional. You've been busy from what I understand. Quite the legal mind for a woman who arrived in Willow Creek with a broken suitcase. Nathan took one step forward. Not dramatically, just one measured step that changed the geometry of the encounter. Watch how you speak to her, Nathan said quietly. Blackwell looked at Nathan with the slight widening of a man recalibrating. Whatever he had expected from Nathan Walker in this moment, it hadn't been that tone. I mean no offense, Blackwell said smoothly. Truly, I'm impressed. He looked at Amelia. You've done well by him. Better than he deserved, frankly. What do you want, Mr. Blackwell? Amelia said. What I've always wanted. to purchase a piece of land that its current owner has been sitting on without developing for 15 years. He spread his hands in a reasonable gesture. I have plans for that territory. Good plans. Development, employment, real money coming into the region. And what about the people on that land? Amelia said. The neighboring ranchers, the families who have been there for generations. Progress requires some disruption, Blackwell said pleasantly. Progress, Amelia said. That's what you call it. I call it what it is. What it is, Amelia said carefully, is trespass, illegal survey of private property, manipulation of a grieving man's son for your own legal gain, and attempted fraud against a territorial land claim. She kept her voice completely level. What it is, Mr. Blackwell, is a case that I have documented in full, that is now in the hands of Mr. Gardner, and that will be the subject of an emergency commissioner's hearing within the next 2 weeks. Blackwell's pleasant expression did not exactly change, but something behind it did. Arthur Dowd, she continued, has withdrawn from your arrangement and filed a letter to that effect with Mr. Gardner this afternoon. She watched his face. There it was, the smallest tightening, the first real evidence of something that was not confidence. Your reversion clause strategy no longer has a claimant. A silence. One of the men behind Blackwell shifted his weight. You, Blackwell said, and his voice had lost some of its pleasantness, not much, but enough, are a very remarkable woman to have accomplished all of that in a single afternoon. The documentation was already prepared, Amelia said. This afternoon was simply delivery. Blackwell looked at Nathan. You knew none of this when I started, he said. This is all her. She's my wife, Nathan said. What's hers is mine, and what's mine, Amelia said, is the land your surveyors trespassed on the legal documentation proving it, and 60 days of evidence that you have been operating in bad faith against a property owner in this territory. She met Blackwell's gaze. We are going to the commissioner's hearing. You are welcome to bring Forsyth and whatever you have, but I want you to understand something before you decide how hard to push. Blackwell waited. I grew up watching my father lose everything because he trusted that the system would protect him, she said. It didn't. I learned from that. I learned that the system protects people who understand it better than the man they're fighting. She paused. I understand it better than Forsyth does, and I am not going to stop. The street was quiet around them. Somewhere a door closed. Blackwell looked at her for a long moment, at Nathan, back at Amelia, and then he did something she hadn't anticipated. He smiled. Not the pleasant, assured smile of the opening. Something smaller, more real. Nathan Walker, he said, spent 15 years hiding on that mountain because he didn't think anyone would see past the land to the man. He looked at Amelia. Seems like someone finally did. He tipped his hat, precisely correctly, and then he turned and walked away. Amelia stood on the street and watched him go. That wasn't a concession, Nathan said quietly beside her. No, she agreed. That was a man deciding to change tactics. Should we be worried? She thought about Blackwell's face in the last moment, not the smile, but the calculation behind it. A man like Blackwell didn't lose gracefully. He regrouped. He found a different angle. Yes, she said honestly, but not today. Nathan stood beside her on the Helena Street, and without making a decision about it, without announcing it, he reached out and took her hand. Not the way he'd taken it on the road in Willow Creek, not an offered hand, a functional hand, the hand of a practical arrangement. This was different. This was the hand of a man who had just watched someone stand in the street and fight for everything he'd spent 15 years trying to protect, and who didn't have language adequate for that, so he reached out and held her hand instead. Amelia looked down at their joined hands. Then she looked ahead at the Helena Street, at the courthouse, with its new addition still under construction, at the sky over the mountains. She didn't let go. Come on, she said. We need to send a wire to Holt about the Northwest stakes before Blackwell's people pull them. Right, Nathan said. But he didn't let go of her hand either. And they walked. They sent the wire to Holt before sundown. Holt's reply came back in under 2 hours, which told Amelia that Charlie had been sitting at the telegraph office waiting, which told her that the ranch hands understood the urgency better than anyone had explicitly said. The message was 6 words, which was exactly as many words as Holt ever used when 2 would do stakes documented. Sheriff's deputy witness. Come home. Nathan read it twice and looked at Amelia. Holt got a deputy out there already, he said. Charlie must have gone to town the moment we left, she said. Smart boy. He is. Nathan folded the telegram. Something settled in his face. Not relief exactly, but the particular steadiness of a man who has discovered that the people around him are more capable than he gave them credit for, and finds this both humbling and clarifying. We should leave first thing tomorrow. We should, Amelia agreed. But tonight, you need to sit with Gardner and go through every piece of documentation one more time. He needs to know the order of presentation for the hearing, what to lead with, what to hold back. That'll take hours. Yes, she said. It will. Nathan looked at her with an expression she was starting to recognize, the one where he was about to say something that required effort, not because the words were hard, but because saying things out loud was still for him an act of deliberate choice rather than reflex. You should be in that meeting, he said, with Gardner, not me. Gardner needs to be comfortable presenting to the commissioner, Amelia said. He needs to feel like he owns the argument. If I'm in the room doing it for him, he'll defer to me in the hearing, and it'll look like the case is being run by a woman with no legal standing. She picked up her coat from the back of the chair. Men listen to other men, Nathan. That's the world we live in. So tonight, you sit with Gardner and you learn the argument well enough to speak it in your own voice. And then in the hearing room, you say it and people hear it. And what will you be doing? Thinking, she said. Because Blackwell changed tactics this afternoon, and I don't yet know what the new tactic is, and I'd very much like to figure that out before we walk into a commissioner's hearing. She sat in the small room of the boarding house, where they'd taken 2 rooms separate plain. Neither of them commented on the arrangement, and she went over everything she knew about Richard Blackwell. Not what he'd done, what he was. She'd learned from her father that the most important thing about an opponent in a business dispute was not his tactics, but his nature. Tactics changed. Nature didn't. Her father had understood his dishonest partner's tactics too late, but what had truly cost him was that he'd never understood the man's nature, that the partner needed to win more than he needed to be right, that for him every relationship was a transaction, and every transaction was a competition. Blackwell, standing on that Helena Street this afternoon, had done something her father's partner had never done. He had smiled. Not the managed smile of the opening. Something real. Something that suggested he had seen something in that street encounter that he found genuinely interesting. A man whose primary emotion is contempt doesn't smile like that when he loses ground. A man whose primary emotion is appetite does. Blackwell wasn't angry that she'd outmaneuvered him this afternoon. He was intrigued. That was more dangerous. She thought about the new tactic for a long time. She went through every angle she could construct a different legal challenge: pressure on Gardner, pressure on the commissioner, social pressure on Nathan through the town of Willow Creek. Each one she turned over and looked at from the inside. It was nearly midnight when she found it. Not a legal move, a personal one. She sat up straighter. If Blackwell had been watching the ranch and he had his people had been on their land riding through their pastures, then he knew things. He knew about Charlie, about Holt, about the state of the ranch's finances before Amelia arrived. He might know about the ledgers she'd been reorganizing. He might know about the survey document she'd found in the back of the old ledger. And if he knew about that, he knew something else. He knew that 3 weeks ago, Nathan Walker hadn't known about the reversion clause, but Amelia had found it within days, which meant that for anyone looking at the timeline, Amelia Carter had arrived in Willow Creek, married Nathan Walker within 48 hours, and immediately begun reorganizing his legal documents and directing his response to a land dispute worth a fortune. Blackwell was going to argue that the marriage was a strategy, that Nathan had brought in someone specifically to construct a legal defense. That the whole arrangement, the practical marriage, the document work, the Helena trip, the Dowd conversation, was a coordinated effort to manipulate the reversion clause before it could be invoked. And if he could make that argument convincingly enough, he could challenge the mineral claim filing on the grounds that it was made in bad faith, that Nathan had known about the clause and the deposit all along, and had deliberately structured his affairs to circumvent it, which was not true. But truth and convincing weren't always the same thing. Amelia sat in the quiet boarding house room and thought about how to protect against an argument that used her own competence against her. It took another hour, and then she picked up the pen and started writing. They left Helena at sunrise. Nathan had come out of the meeting with Gardner at 11 the night before with the focused, slightly hollowed look of a man who has been learning a great deal in a short time, and he'd found Amelia still at the small desk in the boarding house hallway with papers spread around her. "You should sleep," he said. "I found something," she said. "Sit down." He sat on the bench across from her desk, and she told him what she'd worked out, Blackwell's likely new tactic, the bad faith argument, the way her own role in the past weeks could be turned against them. Nathan listened without interrupting, which was one of the things she valued most about him. He listened the way he looked at things completely, without letting his reaction get ahead of his understanding. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment. "So he's going to use you against me," he said. "He's going to try to use us against each other," she corrected. "He'll argue the marriage was strategic, that you knew what you were doing when you stopped on that road." "I didn't know what I was doing," Nathan said. "I stopped because you reminded me of my mother." She looked at him. He said it plainly, the way he said everything, not for effect, not as a performance of feeling, just as a fact that happened to be true. "I didn't know you had a legal mind. I didn't know anything about you. I stopped because you were sitting on a barrel with nowhere to go, and I knew what that felt like." Amelia held his gaze. "I know that," she said, "and you know that. But in a hearing room, what we know and what we can prove are different things." She tapped the papers in front of her. "Which is why I've been writing out a full account of everything, the sequence, the timing, what I knew, and when I knew it, what you told me, and when. Signed and dated as of tonight." She looked at the pages. "If Blackwell argues bad faith, we present this and let the commissioner read the actual timeline." Nathan looked at the papers. "You've been writing your own testimony." "I've been writing the truth," she said, "which is the same thing." He was quiet for a long moment. "Amelia," he said. "Yes. When this is over, I'm going to ask you that question again. The one on the street." She didn't look up from the papers. "I know. I want you to know that before we go back." "I know that too," she said. And because she was a person who could hold two true things at once, she also knew that what she felt about that question had already answered itself quietly, somewhere between the trunk full of documents and the mining commission and the street in Helena, where he'd taken her hand and held it without saying a word about what it meant. She just wasn't ready to say it out loud yet. She kept writing. Willow Creek looked different when they rode back into it. Or rather, it looked exactly the same. The same dusty main road, the same fronts of the same buildings, the same faces of the same people going about the same days. What was different was the way those faces looked at them. Word had traveled, of course. Word always traveled faster than horses in a frontier town, and people knew something had happened in Helena. They didn't know the details, but they knew that Nathan Walker and his new wife had ridden to the territorial capital and done something significant, and that Richard Blackwell's man Greer had been seen riding hard in the same direction the day before, and had come back looking considerably less comfortable than he'd left. Francis Calhoun was waiting at the end of the main road. Not dramatically, not blocking their way. Just standing outside the dry goods store at a time of day when she had no obvious reason to be standing outside anything. "Letters went out," she said before either of them could speak. 14 of them. Signed by people who knew Leland Walker personally and Nathan from his earliest years. 2 of them are from men who were present at the original land transaction with Dowd. Amelia felt something shift in her chest. Francis. The two men who witnessed the Dowd transaction, James Aldrich and Peter Fogg, is dead, but Aldrich is still living south of here. Both say the same thing. Francis's voice was controlled and precise. Dowd was paid fairly. He accepted the price freely. His letter to Leland Walker afterward was not a legal dispute. It was a neighbor's regret. She met Amelia's eyes. That's in the letter Aldrich signed. Nathan looked at the older woman with an expression that was not one Amelia had seen on him before. Open. Almost raw. Thank you, he said. I told you not to thank me, Francis said. But her voice was gentler than the words. The hearing was set for 11 days from the date of Gardner's emergency petition. Those 11 days were the longest of Amelia's life, and the fastest. She worked every day organizing and reorganizing the documentation package into the clearest possible presentation. Gardner came out from Helena on the 8th day to do a practice run of the argument, and they sat at the kitchen table for 4 hours while Nathan delivered the case, and Gardner played commissioner, and Amelia sat to the side and stopped them every time something was unclear or weak or open to a challenge she could foresee. On the 9th day, something happened that none of them had anticipated. A letter arrived addressed to Nathan from a law firm in Billings that Amelia didn't recognize. She brought it to Nathan unopened and stood while he read it. His face changed. "What is it?" she said. He handed her the letter. It was from a firm representing a consortium of investors, not Blackwell, but associated with Blackwell's larger financial network, offering to purchase the Walker Ranch for 3 times the amount of Blackwell's most recent offer. The letter was careful, legally clean, and framed entirely as a business opportunity, with no reference to the pending hearing, or the mineral deposit, or any of the contested ground. 3 times the offer. Amelia read it twice. Did the arithmetic. It was more money than most men saw in a lifetime. More money than would solve every problem Nathan currently had, and several he didn't yet have. She set it on the table. "Your answer," she said. Nathan took the letter back, folded it, and set it beside the lamp. "No," he said. "Nathan, I know what it is. It would clear every debt. It would give you, Amelia." He said her name the way he said the things that mattered, quietly and with full weight. "My parents built this place. My mother came west with nothing the way you did. My father worked this land for 30 years. He looked at the folded letter. "I'm not selling it to the people who've been trying to take it from me for 3 years, dressed up in a new offer, because they're afraid of the hearing." He met her eyes. "What they're afraid of is you. And you're not for sale either." She looked at him for a long moment. "All right," she said. "All right," he said. She picked up the letter and put it in the stove. The hearing was held in the Territorial Commissioner's office in Helena, which was a large room with good light and chairs arranged in rows that were mostly full, because, as Gardner had predicted, a mineral rights dispute over a deposit of this potential size attracted attention from people whose profession required them to pay attention to such things. Blackwell was there. Forsyth was beside him. 3 other men in good suits sat in the second row. Arthur Dowd was also there, which surprised Nathan and didn't surprise Amelia. He sat on the far side of the room alone, with the look of a man attending something he feels obligated to witness. Commissioner Hale was 60 years old, gray-haired, deliberate, with the face of someone who had spent decades hearing people claim things and had developed an immunity to performance. He read the documentation package for 25 minutes before the hearing formally began, during which the room was very quiet. Gardner presented the case cleanly and in the order Amelia had designed the original patent. The boundary correction, the illegal survey, stakes the mineral claim, filing the sequence of Blackwell's escalating pressure and the documented timeline of events. He was good. He'd taken the argument in and made it his own, which was what Amelia had wanted. Forsyth presented his counter-argument with professional fluency. The boundary question. The original purchase agreement and its reversion clause. The suggestion, phrased carefully with deniability, built into every sentence that the marriage between Nathan Walker and Amelia Carter had occurred with suspicious speed and convenient timing relative to the legal dispute, Amelia sat in the gallery beside Nathan and did not react to this. She had written out every word of her response to it and given it to Gardner 3 days ago. Gardner waited until Forsyth was done. Then he presented Amelia's written account. He read it aloud in full. The sequence of events, the exact date she had arrived in Willow Creek, the exact date Nathan had stopped his horse on the road, the exact date she had found the survey document in the trunk after the marriage, after a week of working with the records, and what she had done with that information immediately upon finding it. The conversations with Nathan. The timeline of every decision documented in her own hand, dated and signed. Then Gardner presented Francis Calhoun's letters. All 14 of them, the 2 from witnesses to the original Dowd transaction, establishing that James Dowd had sold freely and had been paid fairly. Then he presented Arthur Dowd's letter, withdrawing from the reversion clause arrangement, and stating in his own words the nature of the arrangement Blackwell had brought him into. The room was extremely quiet. Commissioner Hale looked at the documents for a long time. He looked at Forsyth. "Counselor," he said, "your bad faith argument requires the court to accept that Mr. Walker recruited this woman, a stranger, with no prior connection to the territorial land system, specifically to construct a legal defense before the pending legal challenges had even been formalized." He set down the papers. "The timeline in this account does not support that. The marriage predates the illegal survey activity on Walker land. The document review was initiated as ordinary household management, not in response to any known threat." He looked at Forsyth over his glasses. "Do you have any evidence to the contrary?" Forsyth began to speak. "Evidence," the commissioner said, "not argument." Forsyth stopped. A long silence. "Your illegal survey stakes," Commissioner Hale said now, to the room in general, "constituted trespass on private property. That alone undermines any claim derived from data obtained through those surveys." He looked down at the mineral claim filing. "The Walker mineral claim was filed properly prior to any formal invocation of the reversion clause by the property's documented legal owner." He set the file flat. "The reversion clause has no active claimant. Mr. Arthur Dowd has stated in a witnessed letter that he declines to invoke it." Blackwell's composure from where Amelia sat was remarkable. He did not move. He did not show anything on his face that a stranger would read as distress. But she was not a stranger to that face anymore. She saw it. The moment he understood that this particular game was finished. "The Walker mineral claim is validated," Commissioner Hale said. "The contested boundary survey is rejected on the basis of illegal trespass. The reversion clause is noted as inactive for failure of invocation." He looked at Forsyth. "Counsel may file further motions in the appropriate venue if new evidence arises. As of today, this matter is resolved in favor of the claimant." He closed the file. Nathan sat very still beside Amelia. She did not move either. She was watching Blackwell. Blackwell stood after a moment, buttoned his jacket with precise, unhurried movements, said something quiet to Forsyth, and then walked toward the door. As he passed the row where Nathan and Amelia were seated, he paused. He looked at Nathan. "Your father chose well," he said. "Both times." Then he looked at Amelia, and his expression was not the pleasantness of their first meeting or the recalculation of the street. It was something she hadn't seen from him before. Something close to respect, if a man like Blackwell was capable of it without using it for something. "Mrs. Walker," he said. He walked out. The room began to move around them, Gardner shaking Nathan's hand, Prescott appearing from somewhere in the back rows with a wide grin, people talking. Amelia sat and breathed and let the noise happen around her. Then Nathan took her hand under the table, the way he had on the Helena Street. Not for anyone to see, just because it was the right thing. "It's done," he said quietly. "Yes," she said. She looked at their joined hands, at the commissioner's closed file, at the room full of people who would all have opinions about this day and what it meant. She thought about sitting on a barrel outside Pruitt's store with 11 cents in her pocket and a worthless letter and nowhere to go. She thought about a man on a horse who stopped because his mother had once needed someone to stop. She thought about what it meant to have a home. Not a roof, not a legal arrangement, a home. "Nathan," she said. "Yes." "You wanted to ask me a question." He turned to look at her. The hearing room was loud around them, but they were very quiet inside it. "I want to ask you," he said, "whether this is something else now, for you. Whether what we have is something more than a practical arrangement." She looked at him steadily. At the face she'd been learning for 2 months. The jaw, the careful eyes, the particular way he held himself when he was trying not to show what he felt. The man who helped his neighbors without wanting credit. Who read poetry alone at midnight and didn't mention it. Who had looked at a woman sitting on a barrel with nothing and seen something worth stopping for. "It's been something else for a while," she said. "I just wanted to be sure before I said it." Nathan looked at her the way he looked at things he wanted to understand completely. "And you're sure now?" he said. "I'm sure now," she said. He didn't say anything more. He didn't need to. He held her hand in the crowded hearing room, and she held his back, and that was enough for the moment, because the moment didn't need anything added to it. Across the room, Arthur Dowd was putting on his hat to leave. He caught Amelia's eye as he turned toward the door. He held her gaze for a moment, nodded once, something in it that was not apology exactly, but was adjacent to it. The nod of a man who made a different choice than the one he'd come into the room expecting to make, and has decided to live with the better one. She nodded back. He walked out. Gardner appeared at Nathan's shoulder. "I'd say this calls for a proper dinner," he said. "It does," Nathan said. He stood and held out his hand to Amelia. Not a functional hand, this time. Not the hand of a practical arrangement, but the hand of a man who wanted to walk through a door with his wife beside him. She took it. And for the first time in as long as she could remember, she did not feel the weight of having nowhere to go. She knew exactly where she was going. She was going home. Yeah, but the story didn't end in Helena. It couldn't because Blackwell had lost a hearing, but he hadn't lost his nature, and his nature was the appetite kind, and appetite doesn't stop. When it loses, it redirects. 3 weeks after they returned to the ranch, Charlie Betts arrived at the door at 7 in the morning, with an expression that made Nathan put down his coffee cup before Charlie had said a word. "There's something wrong at the northwest corner," Charlie said. "Holt found it at first light. You need to come." Nathan looked at Amelia. Amelia was already standing up. The northwest corner of the Walker property had been the site of Blackwell's illegal survey stakes, which the sheriff's deputy had documented and which had been central to the commissioner's ruling. The stakes were gone now, properly gone removed by order of the court. What was there instead was fire damage, not from a natural fire. The pattern was wrong, too deliberate, too contained. Someone had set a controlled burn along the edge of the property line, destroying 3 months of fence work, and more importantly, burning through a section of land that contained the primary access route to the mineral deposit. "This was last night," Nathan said. "How did we not see it?" "Wind was from the north," Holt said. "Smoke went the other way." Nathan crouched down and looked at the burn pattern. His face was controlled the way it was when he was most angry. "He can't touch the claim," Amelia said, thinking aloud. "The commissioner's ruling stands, so he's attacking the access." "If the access route is destroyed," Nathan said slowly, "mining the deposit becomes significantly more expensive, maybe prohibitively. Which means we'd need outside investment to develop it. Which is where he comes back in." They looked at each other. "He doesn't need to own the land," Amelia said. "He just needs us to need him." Nathan stood up. His jaw was set in the particular way that meant a decision had been made before the words caught up to it. "He won't get it," Nathan said. "No," Amelia agreed. "He won't." She looked at the burn line and then at the ridge beyond it. "But we need to file an arson report with the sheriff today, with Holt and Charlie as witnesses to the timing. And we need to send Gardner a letter documenting this as continued harassment following the commissioner's ruling. And the access route." She looked at the land, at the burned section, at the ridge. There's another way up, she said. I've seen it on the survey. It's longer, but it doesn't cross through this section. She turned to Holt. Can you ride the northern fence line and tell me if there's a path that comes up through the Aldrich property border? Holt nodded and went to his horse. Charlie looked at Nathan. He's not going to stop, is he? No, Nathan said. Charlie was quiet for a moment. What do we do? Nathan looked at the burn line. At Amelia, who was already pulling the survey map from her coat pocket, where she'd apparently tucked it before she left the house. Because she had known before, Charlie had finished his sentence that this was going to require the survey. Something happened in Nathan's face that was not anger and not resolution, but something older and quieter than either. The look of a man who has spent a very long time fighting alone and has finally understood that he doesn't have to. We keep going, Nathan said. Same as we've been doing. He looked at his wife standing in the early morning with a survey map open in her hands, already finding another way. Same as we've always been doing, he said. The arson report went to the sheriff that same morning. Nathan dictated. Amelia wrote. Holt and Charlie signed as witnesses. The sheriff, a man named Dugan, who had been in Willow Creek longer than most of the buildings and had the measured caution of someone who understood exactly how much power Richard Blackwell carried in this territory, listened to everything, looked at the burn documentation, and said he would investigate. Will he? Nathan said on the ride back. He'll file the report, Amelia said. Whether he investigates in any meaningful way depends on how much he thinks Blackwell is still dangerous. And how much does he think that? Right now, probably still quite a lot. She folded the survey back into her coat. Blackwell lost a hearing. He didn't lose his money or his connections. Dugan knows the difference. Nathan was quiet for a moment. So we're on our own. We've been on our own, she said. That hasn't changed. What's changed is that we have a ruling in our favor and a paper trail that Blackwell keeps adding to. She looked at him. Every time he does something like this, he hands us another document. He can't seem to stop himself. That's something. That's quite a lot, actually, she said. Men like Blackwell are most dangerous when they're patient. When they start moving out of frustration, they make mistakes. Nathan considered this. You think the fire was a mistake? I think the fire was a man who expected to win and didn't trying to remind everyone that he can still cause damage. She paused. It's the move of someone who's lost the long game and knows it. They rode on. After a while, Nathan said, How do you know so much about how men like that think? Amelia looked at the road ahead. My father's partner, she said. I watched that man for 3 years. I watched him maneuver and charm and construct and eventually destroy everything my father built, and I couldn't stop it because I didn't understand it fast enough. She paused. I understand it now. Nathan said nothing. That's the thing about losing everything, she said quietly. If you survive it, you come out understanding things you didn't before, things you'd have preferred not to need to know. She looked at him. Your land, my father's business, different things, same lesson. What's the lesson? That the people who take things from other people always believe they're entitled to what they're taking, she said. They don't think of themselves as thieves. They think of themselves as people who recognize value that others are too foolish to use properly. She held his gaze for a moment. And the only thing that stops them is someone who understands them well enough to be one step ahead. Nathan looked at her the way he did when he was storing something away, not responding to it immediately, but placing it somewhere he'd return to. Then stay one step ahead, he said. That's the plan, she said. Certainly. Gardner's letter arrived 4 days later. It was not the letter Amelia had expected. She had expected an acknowledgement of the arson, filing a note about adding it to the record, a cautious statement about next steps. What she got instead was 2 pages, and the second page made her set the letter down on the desk and sit very still for a moment before she called Nathan in from the yard. He read it standing up, the way he read things that mattered completely. Still no expression moving on his face until he reached the end. Then he set it down. Harlan, he said. Yes, Judge Harlan. The territorial judge who everyone in the region knew was in Blackwell's pocket, the man Nathan had named months ago, when they were first laying out the landscape of who had power and who didn't, had filed a motion to reopen the commissioner's hearing on the grounds of procedural irregularity. The irregularity he cited was Amelia's written account. Her testimony about the sequence of events, the timeline, the documented history of decisions. Harlan was arguing that the account had been submitted to the commissioner without being subject to cross-examination, and that admitting it without challenge had violated Forsyth's right to question the witness. "He wants me in a courtroom," Amelia said. "He wants Forsyth to have a chance to take apart your testimony in front of a judge," Nathan said. "In front of Harlan." "Yes." She picked up the letter again. "Gardner says we can challenge the procedural motion. He thinks we have reasonable grounds." "Do we?" "Legally, probably. But a challenge takes time, and time means the mineral claim sits in uncertainty, and uncertainty is what Blackwell needs." She set the letter flat. "If investors think the claim might be reopened, they won't move on the access route development. We'll be stuck." Nathan sat down at the table. "What does Gardner recommend?" "He's cautious. He says we can fight the procedural motion and probably win, but it'll take 4 to 6 months. She looked up. "Or we can waive the objection and agree to the cross-examination. Let Forsyth question you." "In front of Harlan." She held his gaze. "In an open hearing." Nathan was quiet for a long moment. "That's dangerous." "It is," she agreed. "Harlan will rule against us on everything he can." "He'll try." "Amelia." Nathan leaned forward. "Forsyth is a professional. He'll have spent weeks preparing to take apart everything you wrote. He'll look for inconsistencies, gaps, anything he can use to suggest the timeline isn't what you say it is." "I know. You'd be alone in that room. I can't testify on my own behalf under cross without Forsyth doing the same thing." "I know that too. Then why—" He stopped, looked at her. "You want to do it." She met his eyes. "If we fight the procedural motion and win, Blackwell finds another angle. He keeps finding angles. He has money and lawyers and time, and as long as he believes there's a version of this where he wins, he'll keep going." She set both hands on the table. "But if we walk into that room, and I sit across from Forsyth, and he questions everything I wrote, and I answer every single question in front of Harlan in a public record, and the truth holds because it is the truth, then what he has left is nothing." She paused. "He needs me to be afraid," she said. "He needs us to run from the cross-examination, because if we run from it, it looks like there's something to hide. But there is nothing to hide. Everything I wrote is exactly what happened." She looked at Nathan steadily. "I want to sit in that room and say it out loud where no one can touch it afterward." Nathan looked at her for a long time. "Then we go," he said. "But this time I want Prescott there, and Francis Calhoun, and every person who signed a letter for that commissioner's hearing. You want witnesses." "I want the town there," he said. "I want people who knew my father and know me to sit in those chairs and watch Richard Blackwell's lawyer try to make a liar out of my wife." His voice was even, but had iron in it. "Let him try that in front of all of them." Something moved in Amelia's chest, swift and sure, and completely without warning, the way the truest things always arrived. "Write to Gardner," she said when she could trust her voice. "Tell him we accept the cross-examination." The ride to Helena this time felt different from both times before. The first time they had ridden with urgency and the particular focus of people responding to a threat. The second time, they had ridden with the weight of what had happened between them on the street, the hand holding the question left open. This time, they rode with something steadier. Not calm exactly, the stakes were real, and both of them knew it. But the particular steadiness of people who have decided together and are moving together, which is a different kind of weight than urgency. Francis Calhoun traveled with them. This had not been planned. Francis had simply appeared at the ranch gate on the morning of departure on horseback, with a traveling bag, and the expression of a woman who has made a decision and does not require discussion about it. Francis. Nathan started. I was the first person in Willow Creek who saw this marriage happen, she said. I will be in the room when someone tries to say it was something it wasn't. She looked at Nathan with the look she saved for statements that were final. Don't argue with me. Nathan did not argue with her. James Aldrich came too, the man who had witnessed the original Dowd land transaction and had signed a letter to the commissioner's hearing saying that James Dowd had sold freely and been paid fairly. He was in his 70s, moved slowly, and had the absolute moral authority of someone who has lived long enough to have nothing left to prove and nothing left to fear. Charlie Betts came because Charlie Betts went where Nathan went, and considered this a personal matter. Holt stayed at the ranch because somebody had to, and Holt understood that the ranch itself was part of what they were defending. They arrived in Helena the evening before the hearing, and Gardner met them at his office and spent 2 hours going over what Amelia would face. Forsyth will attack the timing first, Gardner said. The speed of the marriage. He'll try to make it look calculated. Let him, Amelia said. He'll question your knowledge of the reversion clause, whether you knew about it before you found the survey document. I didn't. The timeline shows that clearly. He'll question your motivation. Why a woman with no connections in this territory would marry a man she'd known for 2 days and immediately begin working on his legal documents. Amelia looked at Gardner. Because I had nowhere else to go, she said. And because he was the only person in that town who stopped. She said it simply the way it was. That's the truth. There's no version of that truth that Forsyth can make into something it isn't. Gardner looked at her for a long moment. Then he looked at Nathan. She'll be fine, he said. I know. Nathan said. Sure junk. The hearing room was fuller than the commissioner's hearing had been. Word had spread not just in Helena, but along the roads and telegraph lines that connected the towns of the territory the way word always spread when something involved money and land and the particular frontier drama of a quiet man standing his ground against a powerful one. There were people in the chairs who had no direct stake in the outcome, but had come because this was the kind of story that the territory would be telling for 20 years, and they wanted to say they were there. Blackwell sat in the same position as before, same composure, Forsyth beside him with a leather case full of papers, and the particular set of a man who has prepared very thoroughly for something he intends to win. Judge Harlan was not Commissioner Hale. Where Hale had been deliberate and measured, Harlan was efficient in the way of a man whose efficiency had been purchased. He moved through the opening formalities, quickly established the procedural basis for the hearing, and then nodded to Forsyth. Forsyth stood. He was good. Amelia had expected him to be good, and he was better than that precise, calm, methodical in the way of someone who has been doing this long enough to have removed any performance from it and replaced it with mechanism. He questioned Gardner first, briefly establishing the record from the commissioner's hearing. Then he called Amelia. She walked to the front of the room and sat in the chair that had been placed facing the judge's bench, and did not look at Blackwell, and did not look at Forsyth's leather case, and did not look at the faces in the rows of chairs. She looked at Harlan. She wanted to see exactly what she was dealing with. Harlan met her gaze with the mild professional attention of a man who has already decided an outcome and is going through the motions of reaching it. She understood. Then Forsyth began. He started with the timeline exactly as Gardner had predicted. The dates, the sequence, the marriage within 48 hours of her arrival. You arrived in Willow Creek on September the 4th, Forsyth said. You married Nathan Walker on September the 6th. Yes? You had known him for less than 2 days. Closer to 2 hours when he made the offer, she said. The 2 days were between the offer and the ceremony. An unusual speed for a marriage. An unusual set of circumstances, she said. I had arrived expecting employment that didn't exist with no money and no other options. Mr. Walker needed someone to manage his household and records. The arrangement was practical, and both parties entered it with full understanding of what it was. A practical arrangement, Forsyth repeated, letting the phrase sit. And yet, within weeks of this practical arrangement, you were managing his legal documents. I was hired, if you want to use that word, to manage his records. His legal documents are part of his records. You found the survey document that revealed the mineral deposit. I found it while organizing the contents of a trunk that hadn't been properly maintained. Yes. And you immediately began constructing a legal strategy. I immediately brought it to my husband's attention, she said. Because that's what any person would do who found a document with significant implications for their household. Forsyth paused, shifted his approach smooth as water finding a new channel. Mrs. Walker, he said, before arriving in Willow Creek, did you have any knowledge of Richard Blackwell's interest in the Walker property? No. Did you have any knowledge of the mineral deposit? No. Did you have any contact with anyone connected to this dispute before your arrival in town? No. Yet within 2 months of your marriage, you had identified the primary legal vulnerability in your husband's land claim, constructed a response to it, traveled to Helena, persuaded a witness to withdraw from a legal arrangement. I presented Arthur Dowd with the facts of his situation, Amelia said. He made his own decision and delivered a case to the commissioner's hearing that resulted in a ruling in your husband's favor. Forsyth looked at her steadily. That is a remarkable amount of work for a woman who was, by your own account, a stranger to this territory with no legal training. I had my father's training, she said. He believed in reading everything carefully and understanding what you were looking at. I've done that since I was 15. She held Forsyth's gaze. And I had a very clear motivation, which was, this was my home, she said. Someone was trying to take my home. I'm not in the habit of allowing that. A sound moved through the room. Not dramatic. Just the particular shift of people who have been sitting carefully suddenly settling differently. Forsyth moved to his next prepared question. Mrs. Walker, the account you submitted to the commissioner, the written timeline of events, was prepared by you alone. Yes. No assistance from Mr. Gardner. I showed it to him after I wrote it. He suggested no changes. And you composed it in a single night. Yes. With no reference to legal precedent or procedural guidelines. With reference to the truth, she said, which I didn't need guidelines to remember. Forsyth looked at her for a moment. She could see him recalculating, not dramatically, just the small recalibration of a man who has found that a witness is not going to give him the hesitation or contradiction he'd built his approach around. He tried 3 more angles. The rumors from Columbus, she answered them plainly, naming them as rumors, naming their source as people who had needed someone to blame for her father's business failure and had chosen her. The question of whether she had coached Arthur Dowd, she answered that she had given him information and he had drawn his own conclusions. The question of whether Nathan Walker's offer on the road had been truly spontaneous or whether he had known in advance who she was, she answered that the idea that Nathan had somehow arranged her arrival in a strange town with 11 cents and a dead woman's letter of employment was the least credible thing she had heard in a room full of arguments, and she said it without raising her voice. In the third row, Frances Calhoun made a sound that was almost a laugh. Harlan looked up at the room. The room went quiet. Forsyth looked at his papers, looked at Amelia, looked at his papers again. No further questions, he said. Harlan's ruling took 3 days, which was longer than it should have taken for a procedural question, and shorter than it would have taken if Harlan had been working entirely alone. What moved in those 3 days, Amelia would only partially understand afterward. Gardner made calls. Frances Calhoun wrote another letter, this one not to the commissioner, but to the territorial governor's office, signed by herself and 11 other Willow Creek residents, describing the pattern of legal harassment Nathan Walker had experienced and requesting that the governor's office take note of the proceedings. James Aldrich, who was old and moved slowly and had the moral authority of a man with nothing to prove, requested a private conversation with Harlan that Harlan could not easily refuse without visible discourtesy to a witness of his age and standing. And Arthur Dowd, who had been in the room for the cross-examination and had heard Forsyth try to dismantle Amelia's account piece by piece, and fail, sent a short telegram to Gardner's office that said only, "If you need me to testify in person, I will come." Gardner showed Amelia the telegram. She read it twice. Thought about a man who had grown up carrying his father's grievance, had brought it to a man like Blackwell, because it felt like justice and had finally understood the difference between justice and being used. "Tell him we appreciate it," she said, "and that we hope it won't be necessary." It wasn't. Harlan's ruling came on the third day in a document that Gardner read aloud to them in his office, and the language was careful and measured and clearly composed by a man who understood that the room he was operating in had grown significantly larger than he'd expected, that the governor's office had taken note that there were witnesses of standing, that the procedural motion his ruling sustained would be reviewed, and that the cross-examination had produced nothing that altered the original record. The procedural motion was denied. The commissioner's ruling stood. Nathan read the ruling and set it on Gardner's desk and was quiet for a long moment. Then he extended his hand to Gardner, and Gardner shook it, and that was all. In the hallway outside Gardner's office, Frances Calhoun gripped Amelia by both arms and looked at her with an expression that was the most unguarded Amelia had ever seen on that carefully managed face. "Your father would have been proud of you," Frances said. Amelia felt that land somewhere deep and stay there. "Thank you," she said, "for everything you did." "I didn't do anything," Frances said. "I wrote some letters." She released Amelia's arms and straightened her coat with the brisk efficiency of a woman returning to her regular self after a moment of something more exposed. "The rest was you." They rode home through the late afternoon. The four of them, Nathan, Amelia, Frances, Charlie, and James Aldrich, who rode slowly and comfortably as a man who has done what he came to do and is satisfied. Nobody talked much. They were tired in the good way, the way you're tired after something is truly finished, and the quiet between them was full of that. Somewhere on the road, Charlie fell asleep on his horse, which his horse accommodated with philosophical patience, and Frances noticed and said nothing because she was not going to embarrass the boy. And Nathan noticed and pulled slightly ahead, so Charlie's horse would follow without needing guidance, which was the most Nathan thing Amelia had ever witnessed, and she filed it away in the place where she kept the things about him that mattered. When Willow Creek came into view, James Aldrich said goodbye at the fork and rode south, lifting one hand without turning back. Frances split off at the edge of town, saying she needed to return a borrowed pie dish to someone, and that this had nothing to do with being seen riding in with them, which everyone pretended to believe. Charlie woke up at the edge of town with the impeccable timing of someone who had been asleep for exactly as long as was safe, and said, "Are we home?" And Nathan said, "Almost." And Charlie nodded and straightened on his horse and rode the last stretch with great dignity. Nathan and Amelia rode the last 9 miles to the ranch alone. The sky was doing what Montana skies did in the fall, going through every color it knew in the space of half an hour, like it had something to prove before dark. They didn't talk about the hearing or Harlan or Forsyth or Blackwell or the mineral claim or the burned fence line they'd have to repair or the access route or any of it. They talked about smaller things. Nathan asked if she wanted to plant anything in the kitchen garden before the first frost, and she said she'd been thinking about that, and she thought there was time for garlic if they moved quickly. He said he'd always meant to put in a proper root cellar and had never gotten around to it. She said that was something they could do in spring if they planned it right. He said he supposed they could. The ranch came into view, and Holt was at the gate, which was not typical of Holt, who generally expressed concern through action rather than presence. He stood there with his hat in his hands, looking at them with the expression Amelia now recognized as his version of relief, which on another man would have looked like weeping. "Well," he said. "It's done," Nathan said. Holt put his hat back on, turned around, went back to whatever he'd been doing before without another word. Charlie looked at Amelia. "Is he?" "He's fine," she said. "That's how he celebrates." That evening after dinner, Nathan went to the mantel. He picked up the tin-framed photograph, the one Amelia had looked at on her first night and looked away from. He carried it to the table and set it in front of her. She looked at it properly this time. A woman young with dark hair and a direct gaze, and the particular expression of someone who knew they were being photographed and was not going to perform for it. Not pretty in a soft way. Strong-featured. Real. "Margaret," Amelia said. Yes. Nathan sat down across from her. I want you to know about her, not as a ghost, as a person. He looked at the photograph. She was the most honest person I've ever known until you. She said exactly what she meant and expected you to do the same, and she had no patience for men who couldn't keep up. A pause. She would have done exactly what you did in that room today. Sat down, answered every question, and made Forsyth feel like a fool for asking them. Amelia looked at the photograph for a long moment. She sounds like someone I would have liked, she said. Yes, Nathan said. I think you would have. He was quiet for a moment. I'm not asking you to replace what she was. I don't think that's how it works. I think you hold the people you've loved, and you carry them forward with you, and you make room for new things alongside them. He met her eyes. I've made room. Amelia held his gaze. So have I, she said. He reached across the table. She took his hand. They sat in the lamplight with Margaret's photograph between them and the mountain outside the window, and the kitchen garden waiting for garlic, and the root cellar that would be built in spring, and the northwest corner that would be developed, and the fence that would be repaired, and the 100 practical things that made up a life. And underneath all of it, running through all of it, like water through stone, the thing that had started on a road with a practical offer and nowhere to go, and had become through hard work and hard truth, and the particular grace of two people who showed up for each other when it cost something. Something that neither of them had been looking for, and both of them had needed. Nathan, she said. Yes. I have something to tell you. He waited. When you stopped on that road, she said. When I saw you reach down your hand, I thought it was the end of something, the last thing left to try. She looked at their joined hands on the table. I didn't understand until much later that it was the beginning. Nathan looked at her with the full, unhurried attention he gave to things that mattered. When did you understand, he said. She thought about it honestly, about the midnight coffee and the survey map and Helena and the hearing room and his hand in hers on the street and the letter from Billings that she'd burned in the stove. The letter, she said. The one from Blackwell's consortium. When you said no before, I could finish reading the number. She held his gaze. I understood then. Nathan nodded slowly, like a man confirming something he'd suspected for a while. That was the easy part, he said. She looked at him. Saying no to that kind of money was the easy part. Yes, he said, because you were standing right there. He said it simply, without ornament, the way he said the things that were most true. The hard part was every day before that, trying to figure out whether what I felt was something real or just gratitude. And, it's not gratitude, he said. She held his gaze. Her chest was doing the thing it did when she stopped arguing with herself about what she felt. No, she agreed. It's not. Ugh. Blackwell left the territory that winter. Not publicly. Not with any announcement. He simply ceased to be a present force. His Helena offices quieted. Forsyth moved on to other clients. Greer stopped appearing on the road. There were rumors that a larger enterprise in another territory had required his attention, that the commissioner's ruling had made the Walker land more trouble than it was worth, that Harlan had quietly suggested that continued engagement with this particular matter was inadvisable given the level of documentation now in the public record. Amelia thought it was probably all of those things at once. Men like Blackwell didn't leave because they were defeated. They left when the calculus changed, when the cost of continuing exceeded the value of the prize. She had made the cost high enough over enough months that the prize no longer made sense. She would have preferred a more dramatic ending for him. But she had learned from her father's story that justice in the real world rarely came with a satisfying conclusion. It came with a documentation record and a legal ruling and the quiet absence of someone who had calculated that you were no longer worth the effort. She would take it. Arthur Dowd came to the ranch once in January, on a day when the snow was hard on the ground and Nathan was in the barn and Amelia was alone in the house. She opened the door before he knocked because she'd heard the horse. He stood on the step with his hat in his hands and the look of a man who has rehearsed something and is hoping he still remembers it. I wanted to say it in person, he said. that I'm sorry for my part in it." Amelia looked at him for a moment. "Come in," she said. "I'll make coffee." He came in. She made coffee. They sat at the kitchen table where she had sat with Nathan going through documents in the middle of the night, where she had read the reversion clause for the first time, where a marriage that had started as a practical arrangement had become increment by increment and choice by choice, a life. "Your father," she said. "What he felt about the sale, was it real?" "He believed it was," Dowd said. "Whether he was right—" He held the coffee cup. "I've thought about that a lot. I think he sold when he needed to, and then spent years deciding he'd been cheated because it hurt less than admitting he'd needed to sell." Amelia nodded. She understood that. She understood the way grief and need could rewrite a memory until the memory became something you could be angry at instead of something you had to carry. "He wasn't a bad man," Dowd said. "He was just human," Amelia said. "Yes." He set down the cup. "I'm leaving the territory, going back east, starting over somewhere that doesn't have all of this in it." He looked at the table. "I think I've been trying to correct a story that was already over, and it's taken me too long to understand that." Amelia looked at him. "You made the right choice," she said. "In Gardner's office. That's the one that matters." Dowd looked at her with the expression of a man who needs to be told the right choice mattered, and is not entirely sure he believes it yet, but is working on it. "Maybe," he said. Nathan came in from the barn as Dowd was leaving, and the two men stood in the doorway for a moment, in the way of men who have been on opposite sides of something, and now find themselves simply neighbors in a moment that doesn't require anything from either of them. "Safe travels," Nathan said. "Thank you," Dowd said. "For—" He stopped. "Just thank you." He mounted and rode. Nathan came inside and looked at Amelia. "How did that go?" he said. "Honestly," she said. "I think it went honestly." He nodded, poured himself the coffee that was left, sat down. Outside, the snow was doing what snow did in Montana in January, which was everything. It covered the fence lines and the barn roof and the kitchen garden and the burned section on the northwest corner that they had already begun to replant. It covered the road that ran 9 miles south to Willow Creek and the road that ran north into the mountains and the ridge above the property where the mineral deposit waited patient, as everything in the earth is patient for whatever came next. Spring would come. The root cellar would be built. The access route through the northern fence line would be developed slowly with Prescott's guidance and their own labor, and the kind of careful investment that didn't require a man like Blackwell to make it possible. The garlic Amelia had planted before the first frost would push through the ground in April, and she would stand in the kitchen garden with dirt on her hands and feel the particular satisfaction of something that came from her own work. Charlie Betts would stay on for another 3 years before he married a girl from a ranch east of town and went to start his own place, and Nathan would help him file his land claim, and Amelia would organize his first ledger, and when Charlie rode away on the day he left, he would look back once at the ranch house, and then look forward, and that was exactly right. Francis Calhoun would become someone Amelia had dinner with on Tuesdays when the weather allowed, and they would talk about everything and nothing, and Francis would never once say, "I told you so" about the marriage, which was the greatest act of restraint Amelia had ever witnessed in another human being. Holt would stay forever, because Holt was part of the land the same way the mountains were, and nobody asked him to leave, and he never talked about it. And Nathan Walker, who had spent 15 years hiding what he had because he didn't believe anyone could see past it to who he was, would learn slowly, and then all at once that being known was not the dangerous thing. He'd believed it to be, that the right person seeing you clearly was not a threat, but the only real protection there was. He would learn this from a woman who had arrived with 11 cents and a worthless letter, and the kind of courage that doesn't announce itself, the kind that just keeps moving. Amelia Carter. Walker, who had lost everything and come west to rebuild, and found something she hadn't known to look for, would never stop being thorough. She would never stop reading every document carefully. She would never stop knowing exactly where the reversion clause was and exactly how to fight it if it surfaced again. But she would also learn, And this was the thing she hadn't expected, that a home was not a defensive position. That it was a place where you didn't have to fight. That the work of a home was not the work of holding something against someone, but the daily work of building something with someone which was harder and slower and infinitely more valuable. She had arrived in Willow Creek at the end of something. She had not known she was also at the beginning. A person is not the sum of what they have lost. They are not their 11 cents, or their broken suitcase, or the rumors that followed them out of a city that had already forgotten their name. They are not their worst moment, or the door that closed in their face, or the letter that turned out to mean nothing. A person is what they choose to do at the edge of everything, when the road runs out and the money is gone, and the only thing left is who they are when none of the other things are holding them up. Amelia Carter had chosen to take a stranger's hand. Nathan Walker had chosen to stop his horse. Everything that mattered had grown from those two choices made by two people with nothing to lose and everything still ahead of them. That is what home is. Not the land or the legal claim, or the mineral deposit beneath the Northwest Ridge. Not the ruling from the commissioner, or the letters Francis Calhoun collected, or the documents organized in a trunk that no longer needed to hide what it contained. Home is the person who stopped when everyone else rode past. Home is the person who stayed when the truth came out and the cost became real. Home is the choice made before you knew what it would become, and the 10,000 smaller choices made after each one a little more certain. Until one day you look up and realize you are not afraid anymore, and haven't been for a long time. And the life around you is built so solidly from truth and work, and the particular grace of being genuinely known that nothing Blackwell or anyone like him could have taken it from you, even if they'd tried harder. Nathan Walker had offered Amelia a roof before dark on a desperate evening. What she had built him in return was something no deed could record and no court could rule on. She had given him back his own name. Not the name Blackwell had tried to make into a legal weapon. Not the name the town had written off as a poor mountain cowboy with a stubborn streak, but the name as it actually was, a man of worth, of quiet decency, of the kind of loyalty that doesn't require an audience. And he had given her something she had not known she was still capable of believing in. The proof that a person could lose everything and find on the other side of the losing something realer than what they'd had before. They sat at the kitchen table in January, with coffee going cold between them and the snow outside and the mountain above them and the life they had built around them, and neither of them needed to say anything about any of it, because it was already said in every true thing that had ever passed between them. And that was enough. That was more than enough. That was everything.